Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Monday, and according to the chat, we are 19 days away from game number 1 for Notre Dame, getting on the road to College Station to take on Texas A&M. It's so nice that every day we do these shows, somebody has the countdown over there because that's math, and I don't want to do it, and they just do it for me. And so I'm just going to trust that that number is accurate, Bryan, and we've got these are. I said this to you earlier on the phone, and I don't know if it comes off the right way, but these are the fun shows to do. Like, we get to talk about our predictions, and today we are going to obviously focus on Notre Dame. We're gonna talk big picture. We're gonna give out like our superlatives, like a yearbook. Most likely to succeed, cutest couple, stuff like that. We're gonna do that one. We're not going to do
pretty sure that one's not in there.
That one's not in there.
Especially since Maris isn't on the team anymore, so we can't talk about him and Sonia because that's the only couple that I know of.
This is a good point. That's a solid point.
We're just going to take that one off the list.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. And then we're going to talk about our overall like season predictions, what the postseason might look like for Notre Dame and that kind of stuff. And so we're going to have a lot of fun with that. And then tomorrow, we're going to do more of a national view. We're going to talk about, our college football playoff picks, what that's going to look like. We'll go back over our conference, matchups in the championship, who wins, all of that. And we'll try to put together our brackets and what we think that's going to look like and who's going to be the national champion, and just going to have a lot of fun with this thing. And so
it's for sure.
These are my favorite types of shows to do. And one of the reasons that we're doing these two favorite shows in a row is because these are my last 2 afternoon shows before I have to go back to work.
Yeah. Like we were thinking about doing them like over the next couple Saturdays, but I was like, we've previewed everything. We've got plenty to talk about in the solo shows. Like, what better way to end your summer appearances, which just flew by.
I know, seriously.
Just flew by.
Seriously.
Than to do our prediction shows. And again, this is meant to be fun. This isn't something where you should take what we say and go bet on the season. Like that's not we're going to give you our honest opinions, right? So it's not meant to be like a lighthearted, don't take us seriously kind of show. These are our honest, genuine opinions, but just a reminder that look, these are not meant to be things where you look at and put the mortgage on, Notre Dame doing whatever we predict. So
please don't do
meant
that.
To have some fun with it. And then also what we are requesting from you guys in the chat is obviously, hopefully you guys are paying attention to the show. I think that you will be. But as we talk about different things, we want to hear your guys' opinions, guys and gals' opinions, right? So, we'll do sort of the actual record at the end of the show. So we're going to kind of build into that. We'll do record. We'll talk about how deep we both think they're going to go. But we're going to have some things in the middle too. So some predictions about, individual players, like who, top role player, top newcomers, best lineman, best skill player, most outstanding, MVP, things like that. So when we get to those different things and we are talking about it, I would love to see some feedback from you guys on what you think about. So one section we're going to talk about in part 1 is going to be, what is the minimum record needed this year for you to look back on this team and really kind of twofold. Number one is to say, okay, what's the minimum record to say, okay, this team took a step, but what's the minimum record also, which is a little different, to say, okay, Freeman's the guy, right? Like obviously if they go to the championship game and win it or play in a close game, okay, yeah, but like what's the minimum thing that we need to see? So we'll get to that too. Don't answer that yet when we get there. But I would love to see some interaction from you all in the chat about these different topics. And what do you guys think? Because I know what Vince and I think. We've been talking about it all summer. I want to know what you guys think and what the vibe is from you guys, Vince. And that's going to be part of the fun of really what we're doing today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to jump into it. And, the first part of this entire thing is we want to kind of talk about big picture. And, this is Notre Dame, obviously. And one of the, historic, whether it's good, whether it's bad, hanging on the head of a new coach is the year 3 thing, right? And this is year 3 for Marcus Freeman. And we've talked about it, and beyond the fact that this is year 3 in Notre Dame, and the historic great coaches have done amazing things in year 3, right? They've either won a national championship. Even Brian Kelly went to a national championship game in year 3, and so what does that look like for Marcus Freeman? But then, in addition to that, this year 3 is really shaping up to be his team, and so we're going to talk about that as well, because there are some circumstances that could be different in that regard too. So we're going to break that down, and we're going to talk about, is Marcus Freeman the right guy, and what do they have to do in year 3 to really solidify that and make everybody feel like, okay, Notre Dame's on the right track. I mean, this is a legit conversation here for Marcus Freeman. We've talked about like Joe Rudolph and how this is a big year for him. This is a big year for Marcus Freeman too. And a lot of it has to do with the makeup of the roster.
I mean, look, Vince, you're year 3, obviously, as you stated, big picture always means something for Notre Dame. But for Freeman, I like how you're going with it specifically for Freeman, because it's not just about, well, Holtz did this and so did this, because everybody walks into different situations. This is a different era of football. There's all types of different things that are going on. But for Marcus Freeman, it's one of those things where there's some things he inherited when he stepped in that were kind of working against him, some things he had to fix, some culture fixes that needed to be made, some roster fixes that needed to be made. And you now are in year 3. That's enough time to start to fix those things. And he took over at a time when the portal opened up in a way that had made it a little bit easier to go out there and address some of those holes.
Right.
And they've done that. And so when you talk about what we're going to learn about Marcus Freeman in year 3, Vince, this is a very telling season. It's not the end all be all, in my opinion, barring him winning a championship. I mean, that would be kind of like, well, okay, yeah, he's legit. Like that's the only definitive, or on the flip side, they just utterly collapse. Those are the only two things that could be like, okay, no brainer. Like, this is where we're at. But you're in year 3 now. You're in a situation where this needs to be your team. This team needs to have your DNA on it. And we're going to find out if he knows how to build a team and a culture over the course of an entire offseason into a season to maximize the potential of your football team. I don't know really what the maximum potential of this team is yet. There's things we have to learn. However, I do think you can kind of have an idea of what the floor needs to be when you look at a team like this, Vince, and look at it for saying like, okay, like you got to be at least this. You got to at least be able to take this step. You've got to be able to continue what he did in year 2, which is maybe look at some of the mistakes in year 1, correct them, and improve in year 2. Okay, he did that, I felt, last year. Now you go into year 3, there's more things to learn from last season. Will he be able to address those and push those right buttons? You last year had a lot of new coaches on your staff, a lot of coaching turnover after year 1. Now you're in a situation where those guys are almost all going into year 2. You only have really 2 new coaches on staff, really, that weren't here last year, in Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown, who were should be two of your top coaches on the staff based on their past performance. And so we're going to find out all those things are going to go into how good this team is, which tells us a lot about who Marcus Freeman is. Meaning, can he make the right hires on a coaching staff? Because look, you're going to lose guys. If you're a good coach, you're going to lose guys. You lost Tommy Rees to Alabama. That was an upgrade in a lot of ways for Tommy. I'm talking about for Tommy. Jared Parker got the head coaching job at Troy,
which was a great situation for him to walk into too. That wasn't the UMass head coaching job,
right? Or Brian Kelly got Charlie Molnar that job. Diaco's was legit.
It was different, yeah.
But Charlie Molnar's was
UMass. Yeah.
Yes, Charlie Molnar's was we don't want you here anymore, so let's go find you a job. It's kind of like what Urban Meyer did with Everett Withers back in 2013 when he got rid of him and he got the James Madison head coaching job. This is before James Madison really blew up, because it was more about, I don't want to fire you, but I also
don't
can't
want
be
you
here. So
yeah, right.
And but you're going to have coaches leave.
Yeah.
Can you replace them? You lost Terry Heastain after your first year. Did you make the right hire? That's going to impact the season in a lot of ways. We have a super chat about that here, Vince, that we get to when we get to our season predictions. There was one that I thought was very interesting. look, you moved on from Jared Parker and hired Mike Denbrock. Is that going to pay off? You fired a coach that needed to be let go, and Chancey Stuckey. How did you replace that? You fought hard to keep Al Golden and Mike Mickens here. How's that going to pay off for you? You promoted Max Bulla instead of hiring a more established position coach. How's that going to pay off for you? Now, personally, I think all of those moves are great, including the Max Bulla one. But what I'm saying is you did take a risk. He is a young, not established coach. I think it was the right move. Flat out was the right move, but we're going to find that out.
Yeah, right.
And so all those things factor into what we're going to learn about him. We all think that your talent acquisition at Notre Dame has been pretty good. That you're good at identifying top players and recruiting top players. And a lot of us believe that he's rebuilt the roster. Okay, well, now we're really going to find out, because now that talent should take over. For example, Vince, offensively, we're still really only in through 2 years of recruiting under Marcus Freeman. But defensively, we're 3 years in under Marcus Freeman, because he had that year in 2021 where he was the D coordinator and was able to recruit. So just all those things go together to where now you need to find out who you are. And we're going to learn a lot about him this year.
One of the things I talked with you about prior to the show, and how, it really does kind of line up for Marcus Freeman, with this being his team and those kinds of things. And, you and I talked about, the recruiting and how just the makeup of this team and the guys that they're going to be counting on, they're Freeman guys. Like most of the Brian Kelly guys have either graduated or moved on or whatever the case may be. And while some of that is concerning to some fans, like, for example, the two backup tackles right now are both true freshmen, right? And so you've got, it's a youth movement. Well, this youth movement was all brought into Notre Dame by Marcus Freeman, especially defensively, because they're 1 year ahead, because he was the defensive coordinator for a year. These are his guys, right? So when you talk about, I think I saw a tweet yesterday about all of the snaps that the Notre Dame secondary has, and how, they've got so many guys and all this stuff, these different things. Well, that's true, but 2 of those guys are transfers, right? And the other 2 guys, Benjamin Morrison, he started as a freshman under Marcus Freeman as the defensive coordinator, I believe. And then the next, he was head coach only. Yeah. Okay, see, I get my years mixed up.
He was initially recruited by Freeman when he was still the defensive coordinator.
So there you go.
His first year was 2022, which was Freeman's first year.
Gotcha. So his entire tenure has been under Marcus Freeman. And then Xavier Watts' entire defensive tenure has been under Marcus Freeman.
Because he didn't become a defensive player until Marcus Freeman was the defensive coordinator, right, to your point. Correct.
Exactly.
And 2023 was his first year of just being only a defensive player.
Right. And then, the other guys that are going to help out, Mickey and Gray, and then the 2
both
freshmen,
recruited by Marcus Freeman.
They're all Marcus Freeman guys, right? And then you look at the linebacking core, and outside of Jack Kaiser, who's, I think he's working on his 2nd or 3rd Masters.
The only
He's the only guy. He's the only guy.
The entire roster that wasn't recruited by Marcus Freeman.
And in year 3, that is not always the case, is the point. That is my long-winded way of saying year 3 under Marcus Freeman is different than year 3 under some other coaches, because sometimes they're still dealing with guys that were brought up through the previous coach's regime. And that is not really the case for Notre Dame. The roster, with like 95% of the roster that they're counting on, are Marcus Freeman guys. And so that's another reason why this year is so important, because you made a really good point on the phone, Brian. You said the first 2 years, if they are successful, some of that credit has to go to Brian Kelly, because those are his guys, et cetera, whatever. Fine. Now they've moved on to year 3. That's not really there. And there's the flip side to that too. You can't blame him anymore either. So if you're going to give him credit, then you can also give him blame. I don't really think you can get away with that in year 3 with this particular roster and the way things are made up. It's Marcus Freeman. Positively, negatively, this is Marcus Freeman's team.
Well, I mean, in the other unique part about it too, Vince, when you look at it is, I mean, it's you can't blame Brian Kelly anymore if your roster is not where you need to be.
Exactly.
You also, you also, well, I wanted to reverse that. You're going to get the credit if you win. Whereas we talked about in the past, if you win in your first 2 years, Brian Kelly deserves a lot of the credit because he would have done a lot of things to build that team. But in year 3, look, you're getting most of the credit, but you also don't have that escape of, well, hey, we were inherited this. Now, here's the nice thing about it. Like, Vince, I mean, you know who my contacts are at Notre Dame, right? And their connections they have. Not once in all the conversations that I've ever had with anybody at Notre Dame have I ever had anyone there basically say it was, well, BK did this, or we're trying to overcome this from Brian Kelly, or we've got to do this to, because he did this, or any of those. Never, not once.
Never used it as a built-in excuse.
Never once.
Right.
And so you never heard of my guys versus his guys nonsense like we heard from Brian Kelly back in the day. But when I look at it, but that kind of puts more pressure or I should say leaves more unknowns. Because I'm actually looking at the 2021 team, for example, or 2012 team, Brian Kelly's third team. And you look at his roster, and there was a lot more of a Charlie Weis influence on that roster than you're going to have of Brian Kelly influence on this roster. And I was actually going through that, and it was actually kind of interesting when you compare that to the current team. It makes it very interesting to kind of compare those two things, Vince, because I'm actually doing the thing now. So like if you look at the starting offense in 2012 for Notre Dame, 8 of the 11 starters were Charlie Weis recruits.
Okay.
The only exceptions were Everett Golson, DeVaris Daniels, and Christian Lombard. Everybody else was recruited by Charlie Weis. Defensively, you had 5 Charlie Weis recruits, 5 Brian Kelly recruits, and 1 Tony Alford recruit. Because if you remember correctly, Tony Alford recruited Lewis Nix, who committed to Notre Dame when they didn't have a head coach, but he only ever played for Brian Kelly.
Right. Okay.
So over half your starters are guys that were recruited by, and most of them played a year under Kelly, under Charlie Weis. So like your running back room in 2012 was all guys that were recruited by and played for Charlie Weis in 2009. Sierra Wood, Theo Riddick. TJ Jones was recruited by Brian Kelly, recruited by Charlie Weis, but he played for Brian Kelly. So I count him actually as a Brian Kelly recruit because you could actually TJ, yeah. So yeah. So so you could you could call him a Brian Kelly guy and then say, okay, it's 4 Brian Kelly guys. Robbie Toma is the other, and then obviously DeVaris Daniels is a Kelly guy. Your tight end played a whole season under Charlie Weis. Tyler Eifert was recruited by Charlie Weis. And 4 of your starting offensive linemen were Charlie Weis recruits as well. Zach Martin, Chris Watt, Braxton Cave, Mike Golick Jr. all played at least 1 full season, some 2, Golick 2 under him. Same thing on defense. Whereas you look at this year's team, Riley Leonard is a Freeman-only guy. The running back room's Freeman-only guys. Your starters are Freeman-only guy. You look at receiver, it's transfer Freeman. Tight end is Kelly. Mitchell Evans is a Kelly guy. You look at your offensive line, Tosh Baker is a Kelly guy, although it would have been a Freeman-only guy. Your left guard is a Kelly guy. Your center, right guard, right tackle, all Freeman guys. Your defensive line is really where you have the most Kelly influence, and that's Patelho, Mills, Cross. Onye was recruited by Kelly for a year. Has only ever played for Freeman on defense, but he was recruited the year before Marcus Freeman got there. And then, of course, the rest of your D-line is Kelly or is Freeman guys. Linebacker, there's only 1 Kelly on the entire roster. You can count Xavier Watts as a Kelly guy because he was recruited under Kelly, but his entire defensive tenure is under Freeman. Your cornerback room is entirely under Freeman. Your nickels are under Freeman. And then at safety, Xavier Watts is the only guy you can even remotely give credit to Brian Kelly for. The entire depth chart after that is all Freeman guys. And that's one big difference between what Brian Kelly could, and this isn't to say Freeman's better or worse than Kelly. It's just showing the difference in how things have changed. A big part of the reason for that is the portal. You have that ability now to go into the portal and find those guys that, Brian Kelly couldn't, after 2011, go into the portal and find a replacement for Michael Floyd. That wasn't a thing. You could find a guy, but maybe you could find a graduate guy, but a graduate guy who's a receiver is not going to have the impact that you'd like him to. Maybe you could have found a Chris Mitchell back then. The game has changed a lot, Vince. And there's now less, I would argue, patience, not just because of the times, but just because of the resources there. There's more patience now, or less patience now than there was then, because you also have the ability to do the portal. You can use NIL now. So it's a completely different world, but I also think in some ways it can make it more challenging for Marcus Freeman, because it's harder to hold your team together. So the fact that this is a far deeper team than Brian Kelly ever had in an era of the transfer portal, everyone assumed that one of Steve Angeli or Kenny Minchie was going to go in the portal after this offseason. Everybody assumed it. Neither of them did. Everybody assumed that one of the running backs was going to jump in the portal when the depth chart shaped out. Nobody did. No lineman jumped in the portal that they didn't kind of nudge out, right? You lost those receivers right after the season. You didn't lose anybody else. You didn't lose. Jason Onye could have been like, hey, man, I played last year. I want to go somewhere and start for a couple years. Nope. Gator Rubio, former top 100 recruit, could have been like, I'm not sitting behind Howard Cross and Riley Mills for another year. I want to go somewhere and be the guy. Didn't do it. Donovan Heish could have said, man, I don't second, third team D tackle as a junior. Screw that. I'm going back to Pitt. I'm going to start this year. Didn't do it. He's right. So it's actually kind of impressive that Notre Dame is kind of at a point where, like, I still think they're actually won over the scholarship limit. Think about that. The ability to also hold that team together. So again, just another example of there really aren't any excuses this season. It sucks to lose Charles Jagsaw. Everyone's going to lose somebody at some point in time this year. The good teams can overcome it. So somebody in chat, Devin Ford even stayed. That's a great point.
Good call.
So there's clearly a culture being established here that is a positive, and I think that plus depth were the two biggest big picture issues that Marcus Freeman had to address. So when I'm not talking like quarterback or this position. I mean big picture depth and a culture that just lacked sort of the fire to be great. Now, we know there's a culture here of unity. That's great. But has he built the culture in a way where they're willing to do whatever it takes to go out and win? That we don't know. And that we're going to find out here this season, Vince. Well, and it's going to be fascinating, dude.
Well, and the culture of winning, the culture of, the week to week and being ready to play no matter who the opponent is. And, you've talked about this before, right? Brian Kelly's teams were always right here. Right. And that was good enough to beat the majority of the people on your schedule, but it was never good enough to beat. And rarely was it good enough to beat the teams that were better than you. Right. And so I think Marcus Freeman he has learned like a master's, a doctorate in getting your team prepared, getting them ready for each individual game and things like that. Because look, there's going to be emotional roller coasters in this season. The schedule just shapes out that way, right? You've got pretty darn good opponent followed by a not so good opponent. And then, and it kind of goes up and down. And so how you navigate that is a big piece of this, in my opinion, because in Freeman's first year, he didn't navigate that very well. He didn't, right?
Yeah.
And it got better not last year. It did. It got better.
For the most part, yeah.
But it needs to continue to get better. And the proof's in how they play in those games.
I felt in year one, Marcus Freeman did a much better job of getting his team ready for the big games than he did in year two. That's actually an area where I felt his team took a little bit of a step back in year two. Part of it is because you had so many in a row. It was Ohio State.
And they were
Duke,
all at night.
Louisville, USC. And he didn't do a great job of handling that. That's part of the lessons learned for a young coach is, but you don't have that this year. So you don't have that same issue this year. Year one, he had a hard time getting his team up for the games that didn't matter as much. And the only game they lost that they just to a really bad opponent was Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
They lost to Marshall, who they should not have lost to. That's two teams that you lost to that were inferior to you, but one was good, one was bad. But they didn't play very well against UNLV, in my opinion. They didn't play with a lot of emotion. They just out-talented UNLV. They did not play well against Navy. They jumped out to that big early lead and could find no answers for Navy in the second half. I mean, if there was 3 more minutes left on the clock of that game, that would have been very concerning because the offense could do nothing, and the defense had no answers for them. So this year in 2023, this past year, you certainly did better in where you handled the teams that were beneath you. There were no playing poorly against Navy, no playing poorly against UNLV, no playing poorly against Stanford. Like the equivalent of Stanford in 2023, the equivalent of the 22 Stanford team is Pitt. 3-9 team, not real good, shouldn't scare you. Quarterback's not that great. And Notre Dame beat them by 51.
Right. Beat the brakes off.
Right. Yeah. Maybe you could point to Wake Forest as being a team like them, and they beat them 45-7.
Right.
What you didn't do as good of a job this year was being up for the big games. I think they had a hangover after Ohio State again against Duke. They were not mentally ready against Louisville. Some people have said they weren't ready for the Clemson game. I don't actually agree with that looking back. I don't think the issue was being mentally ready, emotionally ready. I think the issue was they didn't execute very well. They executed poorly. They didn't have answers for certain things. I think there were some coaching woes in that game that hurt them, like the whole, you can't run play action against a team that plays man coverage, right? Like, wasn't that what which makes no sense.
0 sense.
So now year 3, you've had some ups and downs as far as preparation week to week. This is a different type of schedule than he faced in past years. But there's also some similarities that we're going to find out how he learned from them. Look, you hopefully learned from losing to Ohio State in the opener. How does your team handle? And then you got to lose to Ohio State again in year 2. Are you going to be better prepared for having your team ready to mentally bounce back from a loss like that? We're going to find that out.
Right.
You're not going to have that stretch of tough games this year like you had last year. We don't think. But what if some teams are better than you think they are and you end up having a tougher schedule than maybe you anticipated? So that's all part of the lessons learned about Marcus Freeman is we're all excited about what this team can be, but there's a lot of things we still have to learn. We're projecting that he's going to learn those lessons and apply them to this team, but now we need to see it.
Sure.
And that's going to be the big question mark.
Well, and the one thing that I do feel comfortable with as far as projecting what Marcus Freeman has learned and applying that and all of that, from the moment he stepped on campus, I feel like he has been very transparent and very knowledgeable about his mistakes and very clear about fixing those mistakes, right? And you can go all the way back to the Florida State game. I mean, I believe that was his first game as a defensive coordinator. He made a call that he thought was a bad call. Florida State does what they did, and he then apologized to the team for making that call, right? Like, coaches don't do that, Brian. I'm sorry. Like, people in leadership positions generally don't do that, and the ones that do are really good leaders. I think that's the point that I want to make, because remember, if guys weren't on his side at that point, at least in the defensive room, right, then they were on board at that point, because you can respect a guy who says you made a mistake and it's not going to happen again. Like that, to me, that meant something at the time. And then he went through an entire season, and by then he had shown himself to the degree that, of course, they all wanted him as their head coach, right? And so that's all part of it. And we have continued to see, in my opinion, as a head coach, it's his mantra, for goodness sakes. It's to challenge everything, right? That is part of that, is being vulnerable to the mistakes that you've made and the mistakes that your program has made, and being able to analyze them and change it. You challenge everything. And I know it sounds cliche, and I get that, but I don't think it's cliche for him. I really do think that's who he is, and that's what makes me comfortable predicting kind of what he's going to be able to do as a head coach from a culture standpoint, from a team preparation standpoint. He's made some mistakes. Nobody is debating that. He has made some mistakes.
We might debate what was or wasn't a mistake with people, But at the end of the day,
fair.
there's been a lot of lessons learned the
Yes.
first 2 years.
And I do feel like he is somebody that looks at his mistakes and actively tries to learn from them and change, which that has not always been the case with a lot of leadership out there.
It's not lip service. Like you go back to, you're talking about like in 2021 when he was the D coordinator. And I don't remember if he said it publicly, but I know for a fact he said it privately to the defense. He was like, this is on me. Coaches say things. Brian Kelly used to all the time say things publicly like, oh, this is on us. But that's not what the message that was relayed to the team in the locker room.
I think the players are the ones that told us that he did that.
But I was told that before they had the press conference by parents were calling me, telling me this. And one of the parents actually didn't like it. And I was like, no, dude, you're reading this wrong. Yeah. His thing was like, you shouldn't make mistakes. Like, everybody has mistakes, right? You're reading this wrong. Like, coaches don't normally own that. And then he went and fixed it. Exactly. I think too, after the Clemson loss last year, it's a bad loss, Vince. I mean, we went off in the post-game show. Like, you got out tough, physical, you got out executed, you kind of choked away in some key moments, and you just lost an inferior opponent that had 8 starters missing. Like, there's no excuse for that loss. It's Clemson. I don't care. But to watch how pissed off he was the next month of the season as they're steamrolling people. I mean, think about it.
Right.
After the Clemson game, they won 45-7, 56-23, and 40-8. That's how Notre Dame ended last season.
Correct.
And you'd have thought Marcus Freeman went 0-2 in the last 2 games of the regular season.
They scored like 140
I've said this
points
before. Like, if you'd have watched him on the sidelines and that's all you were looking at, you'd have been like, dude, are they losing 45-7?
Right.
Just things like that. So that's good. There's a recognition and acknowledgement of, hey, this isn't good enough. Sure. That's why he spent the offseason. He went to like 5 or 6 different NFL teams. He spent some time on a battleship, or it was it a battleship? Some kind of Navy vessel. Stayed in the, like, he was there 24 hours, actually stayed in the living areas. You know what I mean? Like, $1 million, paid a year, lives in a big old house, like, living in court. All of that to say, where am I lacking in leadership to take us to the next level? And so, there's a willingness to make the changes. However, a willingness to change doesn't mean you're always going to push the right buttons. And that's what the 2024 season is going to tell us. It was an aircraft carrier. That's correct.
Okay.
Somebody in the chat just said that. So I completely forgot. For Battleship, that's because I was watching a YouTube video yesterday on the sinking of the Bismarck, which is a German battleship. So that's why it's on my mind. But can you push the right buttons, right, Vince?
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat said it's a sign of a great coach. Agree. Sign of a smart coach. I'll say that. I don't know if it's a sign of a great coach. It's a sign of a smart coach.
Right.
The sign of a great coach is that you learn from those things, acknowledge those things, and then you know what buttons to push to fix them.
Correct.
That's important.
Correct.
And so that's what we're going to learn about Marcus Freeman. Now let's finish up this section with this, Vince. I'm going to pose both scenarios that you and I talked about.
Okay.
And we'll answer those because we talked about doing one, then we said, hey, let's do the other. I actually want to talk about them both.
Okay.
And we'll just the first one we'll just kind of briefly mention, and then we'll get into the second one maybe a little bit more detail. But number one, what is the minimum success this season for you to say Notre Dame took any kind of step forward as a program? What's the minimum requirement where you say, yeah, even it can even be a little disappointing, but you say they at least took a positive step?
This is tough for me because we've never had a 12-team playoff before. And so this conversation is a little bit different if we have the 4-team playoff, okay? And so I almost feel like I'm lowering the bar a little bit when I say what I'm about to say, because I don't think it would have been good enough in the 4-team playoff, but I do think it's good enough in the 12-team playoff. So the absolute minimum, and would be a disappointment for me, making the playoff. Not winning, but making the playoff at least tells me that they're headed in the right direction. That's where I'm at. And again, I want to be very clear. That is a disappointing season for me.
Agree.
but that's the absolute minimum because I do think that that's still better than last year just because of the nature of the way college football is going to consider making the playoff, quote unquote.
Sure.
And like, it's just different,
Making
right?
the playoff now is going to be kind of like making a New Year's Six Bowl in the past. Where it's
Yes,
not the end
I
all
agree.
be all, but it's a very good season.
I agree. And it's still like my logical brain tells me you've got to win. Well, we'll get into that. We'll get into more of that. But to me, to answer this part of the question, it's make a playoff. Like that shows me progress. Not enough, but it does show me progress.
Here's my view, because I think some in the chat are looking at it from the standpoint of what's a big step. And I'm saying like any kind of improvement at all is the minimum. For just any kind of minimal baby step of a baby step improvement. Is to me 10-2 plus a postseason win.
Okay.
And here's why I say that 10-2 is a better record than you had last year in the regular season. You went from 8-4 to 9-3 to 10-2. That's progress. Your schedule this year on paper is tougher than the one you had last year. Now, a lot of Notre Dame fans don't want to admit that or don't agree with that because they view Ohio State and then nobody else is quote unquote on Ohio State's level. That's fine. But one game doesn't define your opponent. You've got your opponents in 2024 had a better overall record than your opponents in 2023 during the 2023 season. 10-2 plus a postseason win. Now, that could mean the playoff, Vince, right? Because you've won your postseason game your first 2 years. So going 10-3 with a postseason loss doesn't really move the needle for me.
Okay.
And if you say, well, what if they're a 12 seed and they're on the road against a 5 seed? Well, you shouldn't have been a 12 seed. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of where I look at it. So if you're going to disappoint in the regular season and go 10-2, then you need to overachieve in the postseason. Does that make sense?
It does.
You can't underachieve in both.
Well, here, let me pose this scenario to you. I am on the fence about, a lot of it's going to be out of Notre Dame's control, but like, where does the 10-2 Notre Dame team get sent? Are they in the playoff or are they in like a bowl game? Right. And so if it is a non-playoff game and it's just a bowl game, does that count for you?
Yeah, that's why I said postseason win.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to clarify.
Playoff win.
I just wanted to clarify.
Because, again, this is a baby step.
Sure.
It's not one I'm happy about. I'll be disappointed if this team goes 10-2 and doesn't make the playoff and wins. I mean, but you can't take steps back.
Agreed.
10-2 with a postseason loss means you have the exact same record as you did last year.
Sure.
That's not a positive step for me.
No, I agree. Here's the thing, though. If they're 10-2 and they sneak into the playoff, or I use the word sneak because I just think it's going to be tough at 10-2. So at 10-2, you're going to be on the road the first game. You're not going to be hosting at 10-2. Okay, I think we can all agree on that. And so if they win that game, I see that as a huge step because you just went on the road and probably beat an Ole Miss or I don't know, an SEC team or something along those lines in the first round of the playoff. And so I think that win would even be more. So
you're seeing being a 12 seed and then winning that 5?
Yeah, that would be a huge step.
It would depend on what you do the next round because then I go into, okay, cool. Because here's the way I look at that, to your point.
Yeah.
10-2, making the playoff as a 12 seed, you underachieved in one capacity, you overachieved for one game.
Okay.
And won that. But then you go on and you play Oklahoma State in the next round and get beat. Is that really overall? Yes, but here's the thing. That's a step.
Oh, 100%.
Like that's why I said it's a step. There's no debating it's a step. Would I still consider the season a bit of a disappointment? Maybe. It would depend on what they did then in the quarters.
Okay.
A disappointing regular season can be overcome with success in the postseason.
Okay.
That's where I'm coming from.
Okay. Yeah, I see that.
And just would depend on how much. But all of those scenarios you just presented to me, Vince, are steps.
Yes, agreed.
Because now you'd be 11-3 compared to 10-3, even if you lost the quarters to Utah. Okay, that's disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a disappointing season, but it's still a step. So again, you guys see what I'm saying? Like I'm trying to set the
basement. Yeah, this is the
very bottom scenario of
people are jumping off ledges, aren't they? I got the chat closed for a reason.
Right.
I'm guessing people are like, that's unacceptable.
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
Not at all. No, not at all. Chat's been good. Okay. There's some things I disagree with, but the chat's been good. I'm just simply making sure people understand what we're talking about here. This isn't lowering the bar. This is what is the minimum expectation for, okay, they took a baby step.
Right.
Okay. Now, the second part of the question is this, and this goes into more of the successful view. What do you need to see from this team? Again, this isn't our prediction, but what do you need to see? Or if it is your prediction, Vince, you can simply say that my prediction is true. And then don't give the record. We'll talk about that when we get the prediction show. But if it's different than your prediction, is there anything that the next question is, okay, that's fine. You took a baby step, but a baby step doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy. Like, no doubt they've got the right people in place here. They're going to go win it all next year. I don't know that it does that. Of course, we would need to see the specifics of how the season went. Like, maybe they lost 2 games because there was like this rash of major injuries.
Yeah.
Unfortunate situations.
There's always those
asterisks
that you can add to it, and we cannot predict. I mean, that's just not. It's not possible. If Riley Leonard goes down, what does that look like, right? If name your player, name your players, plural. I mean, there's no way that you can obviously predict that.
Yeah. Yep. So I look at it, Vince, and I say that is where I'm at with it. When I look at Marcus Freeman, what would my standard be? My season prediction is better than what I said the minimum is.
Me too.
Because there's a difference between acknowledging progress and being happy.
Yeah.
Or feeling like it was a success. Those are 2 different things. One's 100%. An emotional response. One is a practical response.
Sure.
The thing we talked about as far as the minimum, that is a practical answer.
Right.
Practically speaking, you can't deny that this wasn't a step in the right direction. Now, it was a small step, and I'm tired of small steps.
Correct.
And that's why I say more is needed. That level of minimum, okay, they took a step, leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth and makes me say, you better make a big jump in 2025. Or I may be like, I'm not sure if this is going to work out the way we hoped it would work out. There's nothing that could happen this year outside of just an absolute collapse of this team, 8-4 and worse, for me to say he's not the guy.
Yeah.
Like
it's fair.
But I do think okay, I have some concerns. Now 2025 becomes a big year for you. That's kind of where I'm at because of some of the things that are working in his favor that maybe some other coaches don't have at have had at Notre Dame. So that's kind of where I'm at with this.
Yeah. So it's almost 2 different questions, right? For me to get off board with Marcus Freeman, it would just have to be an absolute disaster this year because I do like Marcus Freeman and I do think he's laying a very positive foundation for the program. I think the recruiting overall is good. I think he's assembled a very good staff. I think there's a lot of positives to go along with Marcus Freeman. I think he represents the university well. Like all of the boxes are checked off the field, in my opinion. Now there's a couple on the field that he still is working on and still needs to check, but I feel like a lot of those are headed in the right direction. And here's the other thing. Even if they have a disastrous season, I'm not saying fire them or anything like that. You're absolutely right. If it is a disaster, then okay, we have to take a step back and we have to kind of analyze and decide, okay, why did these things happen? Is it because of Marcus Freeman? Did they have a bunch of injuries that you just couldn't come back from?
Like what type of injuries?
Absolutely.
Are they like, okay, those are very clearly strength conditioning issues.
Right.
You hired the strength coach.
Exactly. With this
that's on you. But if it's another thing where like a guy gets, one guy gets his leg rolled up on, another guy in a road game has his, Achilles. Like those are not strength conditioning issues, right?
Like, maybe a kid gets speared in the head and he has to be out for 3 weeks because of concussions, and
he misses the big Florida State game the next week. I mean, those are all outside of something like that.
Right.
I'm and again, I think the one area, Vince, in the chat where I think fans are still maybe having a different conversation than what we're having.
Okay.
Is the difference between your emotional satisfaction and what we're talking about, practically speaking, being considered an improvement.
And I get that. It is hard.
Right? Like there's a discussion going on like, well, this year's schedule is harder than last year's. That's fine. We can agree to disagree on that. That's a fair conversation to have because in one instance, we know what last year's teams were because we can look back and look. I can't sit there and say, well, 13-1, Florida State's this year's better than Ohio State was last year. I don't know how this year's version of Florida State's going to do. I know last year's version of Florida State was better than Ohio State. I don't know what that means this year. So there's some projection going on there, but there's not a difference in either direction for me to say, well, 10-2 is progress. Again, I'm not happy about it. I'm not satisfied by it, but it's progress depending on what you do in the postseason.
Exactly.
So those are the interesting aspects of this, Vince. And then also like what kind of losses, because one thing that Notre Dame has avoided under Marcus Freeman, I'm trying to think about this. So they lost Ohio State, Marshall, USC, Stanford, Louisville, Ohio State, Clemson. Outside of last year's Louisville game, none of those games were butt whoopings. Like only one of them was. They've largely avoided the embarrassing bad losses like that under Freeman. That has to continue this year as well if they lose.
Sure.
So
competitive
those
losses,
things. And then the final thing is there's no individual game that's going to define this season.
Agreed.
Like what somebody asked, how will my opinion change if they lose to A&M? No, because if they lose to A&M and win their next 14 games, I'm not going to give a rip that they lost to Texas A&M. Just like if you're a Clemson fan in 2016, you're probably not in your feelings about I still can't believe they lost to Pitt because you don't care because they went and won the national championship. I don't give a rip about Pitt. Maybe that's the game you needed to galvanize the team and go out and win a championship. Right. The end result's what matters, right? Then you can look back and be like, okay, what did that game tell you about what's coming up? And so those are going to be the interesting aspects of what this is going to be, Vince. But if we're talking about that confirmation of, yes, he's the guy, then our predictions to me are the minimum of what he's going to be able to show this year. And we'll get into that. So that's why I wanted to do the both, because as I thought about the second topic, it's like, dude, I kind of think our predictions are going to be the answer to that question, which means we kind of have to give away our predictions in that segment. Yeah. That's why I wanted to kind of change it up a little bit and talk about that minimum, because regular season success needs to be improved, but the postseason success needs to be much better for me to sit back and say, okay, this is.
But you need a modicum amount of success in the regular season in order to even have an opportunity for that postseason success.
But like if they go 12-0, get the 5 seed, and then lose as to the 12 seed, that's a step.
Yeah,
but I'm just as disappointed as if they go 10-2 and they're the 12 seed and they win that game. I'm like, okay, you're 11-2 versus 12-1. Which one's better? The 11-2 is better because you won the games that truly mattered the most, and there's nothing that's going to matter more than the postseason games. So that's why I say is like that's why I tied in the postseason success into. I didn't just say 10-2 is the minimum of success, because 10-2 and a postseason loss means you're no better than you were last year.
Right.
That's not progress. Yeah, but you had a better regular season. Yeah, but you had your first postseason loss. So it's not better. You did better in one area, worse in another. That is a disappointment, because stepping back, stagnating or regressing are the two things that I would consider failures about this season. You can't have either one of those. And that's where I'm coming from with this conversation. Is minimum of positive step has to entail both regular and postseason success, just because let's say the schedule is as soft as some people think that it is. Let's just say that it is. Does 12-0 with a loss to a 12 seed really give you the warm and fuzzies about, or is it just like, well, same old, same old? This is exactly what Bryan Kelly did.
Right.
Beat up on soft schedules and then go get your butts kicked in the postseason.
Exactly.
To a team ranked lower than you. That's not progress.
That's not progress at all.
It's not progress.
Yeah.
So, maybe progress compared to last season only, but even then, I still have my doubts about that. But of course, that would also be, but what if Florida State goes 14-1 and their only losses to Notre Dame? What if Texas A&M goes 11-1 and so there's always the caveats, but by and large, 12-0 in a postseason loss in your first round just does not scream, this is they're ascending championship, here we come. It's just, okay, maybe he's Bryan Kelly. Bryan Kelly did that a couple times. 12-0 regular season, 10-0 regular season, but then when they played a game that mattered, it was, you don't belong here.
It was same old, same old.
You don't belong here. Yeah. That's what the Bama game in 2012 told us. That's what the Clemson ACC title game in 2020 told us. That's what the Bama game in 2020 told us, and that's what the Clemson game in 2018 told us. You don't belong here. Your program is not where these programs are.
Right.
And ultimately, that's the thing that I want to see different.
That's going to do it for part one of today's discussion, Brian, and a good one that it was, but there's plenty more where that came from, so make sure you guys stick around. In the meantime, hit the like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com, all kinds of intel and good stuff hanging out over there, and you'll never know unless you are a member, so make sure you hit it up, boards.irishbreakdown.com. Part two of our discussion today, Brian, is our superlatives discussion. And we have, let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different quote unquote awards to hand out. And I will tell you this from the get-go. For whatever reason, when we do these types of shows and these types of like awards and giving them out and everything, I look at it more as like a head coach, maybe, where I try to spread the wealth a little bit, and I don't like to give the same person 2 awards, if that makes sense. Now, there are a lot of guys that could fit into these different categories, and maybe you gave out the same player a couple of different awards. I actually crossed out a guy and moved him because I felt like he fit in this other spot better, that kind of stuff. But this is the fun part of the show. Not that the whole show is not fun, but this part right here,
because we haven't given each other answers.
No, we have not shared.
Because I wanted you to be able to take whatever direction you wanted to go. Like, I don't care about having 2. So, like, if my best lineman is also my best player, I'm not going to pick someone else. Like, if just hypothetically, let's say you have Riley Mills as your most outstanding player, but then you're not going to have him as your best lineman. Like, you know what I mean? So I
spread it out.
I'm willing to do it, but I'm not going to have it towards like of the non-MOP MVP honors. Those are the 2 that you I don't count as multiples.
Gotcha.
Like, I'm not going to have a guy be the of the others. I'm kind of with you on. Like, I'm not going to have the top skill player be the top breakout.
Sure.
That's how those things went. But
sure.
The last 2 I kind of am problem fitting. And then also, Vince, at the end of this, there was a super chat that kind of was that kind of ties into this before we jump into the other predictions. So we'll get to those as well before we move on to our actual predictions.
Perfect. So let's just jump into this thing and we'll just kind of go back and forth, Brian, and let's start with top role player, and that could be someone who it could be a starter, but it also could be somebody who's in the rotation. It could be a defensive lineman, for example. It could be a linebacker who's in the rotation. It could be a wide receiver who's not a technical starter, right? But is for all intents and purposes, a starter because you're in the top 6. It could be one of the running backs, for example. So lots of choices for this one for top role player. What say you, Brian Driscoll?
So on offense, it was Jadarian Price. Because as you said, you could
defense.
We're going to go offense and defense. Yeah. On offense, for me, Vince, I look at Jadarian Price this way. I think he's going to basically kind of play starter minutes to a degree, but he's not going to be the starter. He's going to be part of a rotation. He's not going to be the guy that gets all the pub. He's not going to be the guy that gets all the love. Pun intended. But he's going to be a very good football player.
Sure.
And I thought about having him in my breakout category, but there's some starters that I am projecting to the breakout category.
Yep.
That's why I went with him here. I think he's going to be a very he's going to be kind of like what Logan Diggs was 2 years ago, where everybody loved Audric. So Logan just constantly got crapped on because he wasn't Audric,
which is one of the reasons
his numbers were very good. Over 800 yards. He had over 1,000 yards of total offense that year. A guy that had over 1,000 yards as a sophomore running back was a guy that some fans were like, I don't care, let him go. Like, okay, well, I think he's pretty flipping good that year. You know what I mean? And so that would be a role player because Audric was there. Chris Tyree started the year at running back, but it was at the end of the day, it was Logan played a very important role that season. And every time Audric was getting benched for fumbling, Logan stepped in and played well.
Sure.
And so I think Jadarian's going to be a more explosive, better version of what Logan Diggs was in 2022. If that says anything about how good I think he's going to be this season.
Sure.
For Notre Dame.
Well, I didn't have an offensive guy written down, so I just now wrote one down. And I initially Jadarian Price is a great answer for this, because I think it is going to be a 1A, 1B, and choose who your A and B are going to be from a game-to-game basis. Like that's what I'll say to that. I went a different direction just because I want to talk about somebody else, and so I went with Jordan Faison. I don't think he's actually going to start, because I think right now they're trying to they're trying to figure out kind of where they can get him on the field the most, right? Because they've got him at field. We know that what he can do in the slot. I think he's going to kind of be a bit of a Swiss Army knife for this wide receiving core. And, he did break out, I guess, quote unquote, the last few games of the season and did some great things for Notre Dame. Obviously got himself off of walk-on status and became a scholarship player, all of those awesome things. But I still think he's going to be kind of the forgotten man from a defensive game plan standpoint, because there's a lot of other names in this wide receiving core who I think we're probably going to get named first as guys that you need to game plan against. And I think that's going to give a great opportunity for number 6 to make some plays and to be a guy.
Do you factor in the potential that he also adds on special teams into this equation too? Like if he's a returner that only factors into his impact because he's an offensive player, do you kind of count that as something different?
That's a very interesting piece of it, because I do think he is going to end up being the punt returner. And I think he's going to be a very good punt returner. He only returned, I think, 2 punts last year. And I think one went for 20 yards or something like that. I mean, you're more the stat guy than I am, but I think that's what I remember. And I think he could be dynamic as a punt returner, right? We know what Harrison can do as a kick returner because it's a different skill set, right? I think Jordan Faison, with his lacrosse background and what he has to do with his legs in a lacrosse game, I think that makes him perfectly suited for a punt return man as well. And so maybe he doesn't have it all the time, but I think he's going to be a dynamic punt returner. So that's definitely part of the equation for sure.
Let's go to newcomer next, Vince, and we're going to take newcomer in 2 different directions.
We didn't do role player for defense yet.
My gosh. See, I'm the one that was wanting to do both and I completely forgot. Let's go defense. Who's your so you're when you were just thinking we were going to do one, you had a defensive player, obviously. So who would that be?
Well, and who
it is.
Probably not going to surprise you very much, because I'm very high on what he's going to do this year, and it's Josh Burnham. He's not penciled in as the starter. He's penciled in as a backup. And I love his motor. I love what he has done physically to his body to adapt to being on the defensive line and being a contributor this year. I just think he's so twitchy coming off the ball. I just think he's going to be a dynamic player on the edge for Notre Dame this year. And I am super excited to see what Josh Burnham can do. I think he's going to be a guy that they're going to be putting out there in the big moments. I think that's when it's all said and done, I think you're going to see Burnham out there in the big moments. So I think he's my role player of the year on defense.
I went Jalen Sneed.
Okay.
And the reason I went Jalen Sneed is I don't think he's going to be a starter. Like he's going to be maybe the starting rover, but like as we saw last year, the starting rover's not in the top 11 in regard to snaps.
Right.
I think Jalen Sneed is going to be a little bit of a do-it-all player for Notre. He's going to be in the rotation at linebacker. He'll start at times at rover. He'll come in maybe at times at will, and he's going to be a third down pass rusher. He's going to do a little bit of everything for this defense. That is the very definition of a role player.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So a lot of times people think role player, they think, well, not a guy that doesn't matter as much. For me, Vince, a role player as a coach, role players are vital.
Oh, yeah.
To your success.
Oh, yeah.
And so when I look at Jalen Sneed, I think he's going to be sort of a jack of all trades, do a little bit of everything kind of guy. Now that he's a junior, he's been more motivated. He looks thick. He looks stronger. I don't know that he looks necessarily that much bigger, but he looks stronger than he did. And he's been more locked in so far than I've ever seen him. Now, again, we're not even at a halfway point of camp, right? But from what I've seen of Jalen Sneed, I think he's ready to give you something important this year. Now, is he ready to have like a big national breakout season? That I don't see. But we're going to look back and be like, he's going to be I'll put it this way. He's going to be a better playmaking version of Danny Spond. Remember in 2012, nobody really talked about Danny Spond. But if you go back and watch those games, he was so important to that 2012 defense as that that what they call that, the dog, or I think he was the dog.
Yeah,
right, was the field side outside guy, and then the cat was the boundary. Like that was Shumbo. I believe it might have been the other one. Danny Spahn never got love, but he was so important to that team as a role player, and I think that's what Jalen Snead's going to bring this year, right? And we've seen flashes of it in the past. I think you're going to, but that's all they're going to need him to do is in spurts. He's not. I don't see him being an every down player, but in spurts. I think the staff has finally figured out, too, Vince, how to use him.
Right.
Like, this is what he's good at. And this is what he isn't good at. So let's make sure we're using him in areas where he's good at.
Right.
And you weren't going to justify taking Marist or J.D. Bertrand off the field last year to find a role for Jalen Snead. You just weren't going to because he was going to put himself in some bad spots. You're going to be more willing to accept that this year. But I also don't think he's going to be as undisciplined as he was last year. And that's why he gets my pick.
Cool. I like it. I dig it. Next category, top newcomer, and we split this into two different parts. We've got top newcomer as a transfer and top newcomer as a freshman. Okay, yeah. So we got two different ways to go. So top newcomer as a transfer, what say you?
This one's kind of easy for me, and I love the group of newcomers they have. I love Chris Mitchell. I think it was a huge pickup. I love what Bo Collins is doing. Like every time I talk to a source, and I just talked to another source yesterday that was at the most recent scrimmage.
Okay.
And I asked this person how the team looked. And this is not a person that normally watches the offense. This is a person that watches the defense. And I'm going to read you exactly the very first thing they said to me. Receivers are legit. I've heard that from so many different people close to the program. And you keep hearing that. So and a big part of that is the newcomers. I mean, yes, Greathouse is having a great offseason. It's Faison. But the speed between, and Jaden Harrison, I didn't mention Jaden. He's another one that brings some juice to the table.
Yep.
I talked to another source recently that was at a practice, and he was like, I don't know what they're going to do with this guy, but they got to figure something out to get this guy to football because he's just electric. Now, again, he doesn't look like a natural receiver, but man, when you get if you can eliminate all the stuff between the snap and him getting the ball and just focus on what he can do with him, he's going to be electric. But I think Riley Leonard is, at the end of the day, the guy that's easily the most impactful and most talented and best newcomer in the portal, through the portal. That's a no-brainer for me. I mean, he's a guy that I believe has first-round NFL draft pick potential.
Oh, yeah.
Now, will he get to that this year? Don't know.
Sure.
But he is a very talented quarterback. He's bigger. We were talking about this in practice the other day. It was me, you, and Steyer standing next to him. Like, you really don't notice how big he is until you actually see him up in person. Like, he's tall and long, but
he's a big boy.
And he's very athletic. That was the next thing that this person told me is Leonard's fast. And he's improving as a passer. He's going to have really good weapons around him. I just think he's going to be, if he can stay healthy, he's going to be a very dynamic player for Notre Dame. Very dynamic player.
That's a great answer. I have Riley Leonard in a different slot, and so my rules. I don't put him in multiple slots, and that's just because I like to be different.
So he won't be the best newcomer, but he's going to be one of. Okay, makes sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense to you. That's okay.
That was called sarcasm. Thought I was landing pick. But who is your pick, though, Vince?
So I am in the same neighborhood as where you were. I have Chris Mitchell as my top newcomer. I think that. He has number one receiver written all over him. I mean, I know that he hasn't done it at the Notre Dame level. I get all of that. But it's a receiver. Like, I don't think that matters
Vince,
to me.
I got to interrupt. Sorry. He only played one game against a Power 5 team last year.
And he dominated it.
I mean, so what if it was on the road against an SEC team and he had 6 catches for 157 yards?
Right. Thank you.
That's called sarcasm again. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's coming through in the show, but that's also called sarcasm.
Yes. But I just think that he is going to be smooth. He is going to be consistent. And like I said, he's got number one receiver written all over him, which then allows for guys like Jaden Greathouse, Bo Collins, Jaden Harrison, Faison. It allows them to do some things because, I think Chris Mitchell has all the potential to be that guy that gets bracketed, for example. And then you, of course, bring in the tight ends and what they can do athletically and in the pass game. I think he's going to be instrumental in the passing game. And of course, I know the guy who's throwing him the ball, but I'm sure he is very excited about the fact that he's got these 3 guys that have come in and have just really opened up the wide receiver room and allowed it to allowed them as a whole to be legit and be dogs, right? And so that's why I picked Chris Mitchell.
I mean, honestly, Vince, I wouldn't have cared who you picked if you picked a receiver.
Yeah.
I mean, meaning like they're all so good.
Oh, I could have made a case for all three of them.
Yes.
To be perfectly honest with
they're
you,
all,
I really could have.
They all bring something dynamic to the table.
Right.
Like, you know, and I've said this before, like Chris Mitchell's my big concern. Or not Chris Mitchell, excuse me. Jaden Harrison's my big concern if I'm looking at it from the standpoint of, you know, looking at a guy that is he really a receiver?
Right.
Like, is he, does he really like have that kind of ability? Does he really have, you know, like, yes, he's a great return guy and all these other kind of things, but he's really kind of, you know, that type of player. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know, like I said before, once he gets the ball in his hands, he's electric, just dynamic. If you'd have gone with Bo Collins, I'd have been like, cool, man, I get it.
Yeah.
I think Bo could end up being the best of all of the receivers for a host of reasons, including it. But I want to point something out real quick about your pick of Chris Mitchell. Last year, Arkansas, who's not a great SEC team, as was pointed out in the chat, faced off against Luther Burden. It faced off against the kid that got drafted, Ricky Pearsall from Florida, who got drafted, I think, in second or third round last year. Also played against Alabama last season, and they had drafted receiver. Played against Ole Miss, who had Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins, right? Guys that are going to be high draft picks. Played against Texas A&M and that group of receivers, Evan Stewart, who everybody raves about. Played against LSU with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas last season. And so all those SEC teams, there's only 3 receivers that went over 100 yards against Arkansas. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Chris Mitchell. That's it.
Right.
That's the list. And Mitchell or Thomas had 5 catches for 133 yards. Malik Neighbors had 8 catches for 130 yards. Chris Mitchell had 6 catches for 157 yards. So I just thought it was kind of smart to point that out.
Right.
That, you know, there's some other really good receivers that played against them with much better quarterbacks and much better supporting casts to take the pressure off of Chris Mitchell. And nobody did what Chris Mitchell did against them last year. He had the most yards that Arkansas gave up the entire year, despite them playing 2 first-round. I mean, hold on. Is it 3 first-round picks at receiver? Well, 3 eventually, because they also played against Luther Burden, who had 6 catches for 55 yards against Arkansas. Theo Weiss had 1 catch for 15 yards. Ricky Pearsall, who I believe was a 2nd or 3rd round pick, had 5 catches for 55 yards against Arkansas. So, like, yeah, you got to show you can do it week after week after week, but the guy's pretty flipping good.
Exactly.
And there's a reason
we've
that
seen
Notre Dame
it.
went and got
I mean,
right.
we've seen it. I'm not gonna lie to you, because I didn't want to disappoint a lot of the people out there who love my affinity for special teams. Mitch Jeter was in the neighborhood of being picked for this spot. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, I mean, you could kind of go there. I mean,
look, I know, and I had a whole argument ready to go.
Newcomer, when you talk about newcomer,
right? They've
got a new transfer at punter, a new transfer at kicker, and a new transfer in the return game.
And that's the other thing about Rendell is I didn't know if he was classified as a transfer or as a freshman. I assume he went to college in Australia, but I'm not.
Yes, he did. He didn't.
Sure.
I don't know that he played football there because like they have a different thing. But yeah, by the way, I was wrong. Ricky Pearsall was a 1st round pick of the Niners. The chat is pointed out. So they played against 3 1st round picks at receiver last year, and none of them had as many yards against Arkansas as Chris Mitchell did.
I think Mitch Jeter is going to lower the heart rates of a lot of people out there just because he's so consistent. He's so consistent. And like that's huge for Notre Dame, to be honest with you. If they ever come into a position where a field goal is going to make a difference in a game, I feel very good about Notre Dame's chances to kick that field goal and to go between the uprights.
Yes.
So
100%.
He was right there for me. I'm not gonna lie.
100%.
Right there.
100%. So, Vince, when newcomer special teams, I would go with Mitch Jeter as well in the transfer portal. And that's saying you got an All-American coming back at kick return or coming in as a kick returner. Sure. It's just, to your point, you're going to have a much bigger impact as a place kicker than you will as a return man.
Right.
You're going to score more points. You're going to be in more clutch moments, all those kind of things.
Right.
So yeah, I would go there with him. How about newcomer in the freshman class or on transfer newcomer on defense, Vince?
Oh, we're going both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
See, I didn't even do both sides of the ball for any of it. It's fine.
During my rant, my long things, be looking ahead and thinking about
I got
that,
you.
because I did say that I wanted to do offense and one defense. So.
It's all good, brother. So our options are fairly limited defensively, right? It's either
well, there's Rod Hurd,
and Jordan Clark,
and RJ Oben.
Forgot about RJ Oben.
3 starters.
Yeah, no, I forgot about RJ Oben.
3 pretty good ones. So
I think RJ Oben is going to be really, really good at his spot. I think just because he comes in with more experience, at that position. But I'm still going to go with Rod Hurd. I feel very good about what I've seen from Rod Hurd in practice. I feel good about the experience that he has coming in. I think that he is going to play off of Xavier Watts very, very well. And I also think, and this might be a point that is not obvious on the field per se, I think he's going to be a very, very good example for Adon Schuler. I think having him as a veteran presence there kind of takes some pressure off of Adon Schuler. He doesn't have to be the starter. He doesn't have to be the man next to an All-American. He can just be himself, right? And so I think that trickle-down effect is actually going to be also very, very important as well. So I'm going to go with Rod Hurd here.
I did too. That's my pick. For all the things you said, I think it's a smart pick. A smart pick. I mean, I like RJ Oben. He's going to be very good. Jordan Clark's going to be very steady for them, I hope. But I think Rod Hurd has a chance to be an impact player. I do. Of the 3, he gives me the most. I think he's going to be an impact player vibes. But I would rank it this way: Hurd, Oben, Clark is the ranking I would give the 3 of those guys. I would too. If I was predicting the who's going to have the biggest impact of the transfers.
Me too.
What would you do offensively? I would probably go Leonard. I'd probably go Leonard, Collins, Mitchell, Harrison. You would probably go Leonard. Yeah. Right. Let's just take away your thing. Leonard, Mitchell, Collins,
Harrison. Yeah. Okay. Just strictly offensively. Yes. Correct. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's go freshman, Vince. Who's your pick for the most impactful freshman on offense for Notre Dame?
So this is not as difficult as it may sound, because you're like, okay, well, which freshmen are actually going to be, impactful offensively this season? Which one is it? Micah Gilbert? Is it one of the running backs? Could you see a tight end get in there? Right. That's definitely a possibility. If what we're seeing in practice is a possibility. I went into the backfield, Brian, and I had a hard time between which guy, Aeneas Williams or Keedring Young, I was going to go with, especially after your visual of the pass blocking. But I am going to go with Keedring Young here. I think he has the best opportunity to be that, to find a niche someplace in that, whatever that 8-man starting rotation that he's got, that Coach McCullough has. He tries to fit different guys in there. So I'm going to go with Keedring Young, although Micah Gilbert was a very, very close second for me, because I think maybe about halfway through the season, he could break into or expand that wide receiver rotation, because I think they're going to start with 6. I feel very confident about the 6, but I think he's at 7 and knocking on the door pretty loudly. And, it's like any coach, right? In a big game, your rotation shrinks, right? I think in A&M, I think that rotation is smaller, and I don't think they're going to necessarily, give him that opportunity against A&M. But then the consecutive games after that is where he could start to find maybe a little bit of a niche, getting in there. But, and I don't know how much Keedring Young is actually going to be on the field necessarily against Texas A&M, to be honest with you. But to pick a freshman, he's the one I went with.
I don't know that any of the freshmen are going to see much time against Texas A&M.
Yep.
Against A&M. I don't know. I went with Micah Gilbert just because.
Okay. Yeah, I get that.
I had a hard time with this one because part of me wanted to go with one of the running backs, as you went with. Part of me wanted to go with projecting that there's going to be an injury that's going to force Kirby Lambert into the lineup, like a Joe Alt type of thing. Andrew Gilmore in the chat projects a potential injury, and so that's why he went with Anthony Knapp, right? So like,
oh wow,
so like I thought about going that route with Gerby, but at the end of the day, I'm just going, okay, if there's no injuries to anyone, what happens? Because like if there's one injury at running back, immediately one of those freshmen becomes, like the easy pick.
Right.
So I'm not projecting that because I don't know who it's going to be.
Sure.
Micah Gilbert was my pick just because I think he's going to eventually force himself into the rotation. I watched that kid play and I'm just like, God, you got to find a way to get that guy in the field. Like Cam Williams has the potential to be a star, but Cam is still very much learning the position.
Yep.
Micah looks like a veteran. Like Micah and Jaden Greathouse go through drills and run routes like they're juniors and seniors in college. They're very advanced players. And I think that's going to help Micah. Like I don't anticipate him being the best freshman overall from this team, but I think he'll be the best freshman in year one from this team. After that, I kind of lean towards Kedron as my next pick, with Aeneas really close behind.
Yep.
And if there's an injury like Andrew Gilmore's talking about, then I do think we could see a freshman maybe. Because like honestly, if one of the two tackles goes down, you almost are forced to put a freshman in. If it's an injury that's going to cost multiple games. So I'm going to go there. I just think Micah Gilbert. It's easier to get a sixth receiver into a game than it is a third or a fourth running back with some consistency. That's kind of the way I looked at it. Because I think the first two running backs are going to eat up a lot more of the touches this year than the number 3 running back had last year.
Sure. I agree.
That's
completely.
part of it as well.
And that's the thing. It's like, I probably would have been more confident in the Kedron Young pick if the pass blocking didn't occur the other day that you were watching. And
sure, but I mean, it's like
I get
practice 9.
Oh, I totally get it. Yeah.
And he missed all spring. Right.
It'll be interesting. But I do agree with that fact that the two top guys could steal some of those third guy reps in there. Completely agree with that. Yeah, completely.
I could see a scenario where, so like in my head, Vince, I'm also going with guys that are making an impact in meaningful downs. I could see a scenario, one of the backup running back rushes for like 400 or so yards, but a lot of it's like
in junk time.
You come in the fourth quarter and rip off a couple big runs and things like that as well. I think Micah's gonna have the biggest impact on day one. But I had a tough time with this one because I really struggled with him in Kedron and Aeneas. And of course I wanted to go with Gerby but that was more wishful thinking.
Yeah,
than anything else.
100%. Yes, I agree with that completely. I don't see that being the case because I just don't see. Yeah, I agree.
Somebody in the chat asked about what happened to Cam Williams. Nothing's happened to him. He's just raw, and he's at a position where there's depth. I think a little bit more established. You've got he's at Z. There's Chris Mitchell. You've got Jordan Faison there. You've got KK Smith there. It's just a little bit more established and less injury history there. Whereas with Micah, also that this was a small factor because, like I said, I try to keep injury out. But I look at it and I'm like, it's Jaden Thomas, Bo Collins, and him. Jaden can kind of move all over, but Jaden and Bo have both had injury problems in their entire careers. So that could open up some things a little bit as well. But I just think Micah Gilbert just has really impressed me with what he's shown so far. What about your freshman on defense, Vince? Who's your pick there? This one to me is even tougher because I think there's a couple freshmen that are going to play a lot this year. There's two of them in particular.
To me, this one was easy.
Okay,
to be perfectly honest with you, and it's KVA, Kingston Viliamasa. I understand where you're coming from. Maybe
that was my pick, by the way, as well. But
defensive line, there's a chance.
And Bryce Young's going to play.
Yeah, and maybe one of those one of the corners steps up and has to be in that rotation.
Leonard Moore potentially,
right. So I see where you're coming from. I think
I also think about potentially the impact of Sean Sevillano. Maybe earning like a short yardage goal line role where he has some impactful minutes, and he's an injury away from stepping into the nose as well. So, those are the four that I considered.
Yes, I get that. Yeah, and I feel like it came down to me between Bryce Young and KVA. Here's the reason I went with KVA. I think he's going to get more early opportunities, and I think Bryce is ascending. Don't get me wrong, but there's so much talent on the defensive line right now. I'm still very curious to see where he kind of fits in that rotation, what that looks like, things like that. And we talked about, freshmen on the offensive side probably not seeing a lot of playing time, if any, at Texas A&M. KVA and Bryce Young, I think, are going to play, and they're going to play in that first game. KVA for sure, Bryce Young, we'll see how it looks and where he lands on the depth chart. But KVA is going to play. And I think that he has really rocketed up the depth chart. We'll see what that rotation looks like too.
Well,
but
I don't know that I would say he's necessarily rocketed up it. He just kind of stepped on campus and he was a 2.
Yeah, well,
because of some of the depth issues where he plays. But he was going to be there anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
He was going to earn that anyway. Like, I looked at it like this, Vince. I went with the same pick you did. I went with Kingston Viliama-Asa. And the reason why is I think Bryce Young's going to play a lot this year. I think Kingston is immediately day one, like game one, Texas A&M, the number 2 Mike, and maybe the 3rd overall linebacker off the bench, potentially. Like Mike or Will. I could see a scenario where eventually he's doing that. He's going to make an impact, in my opinion. But it was closer for me because I don't think either of them are going to play a million snaps, barring injury. Because, again, I'm trying to keep injuries out of it as much as I can.
Me too.
A little small, tiny factor with Micah Gilbert. But overall, I'm not trying to project injuries on this particular one. And just kind of going with what we know, I think Kingston plays more. And playing linebacker allows him to have more of an every down impact than Bryce. But I could also see a scenario, Vince, where by the 3rd or 4th game of the year, Bryce Young's part of their nickel package over the guard.
Sure.
And he's just, you know what I mean? And he's, he's having an Aaron Lynch type of rookie season where he's 5 sacks. So, I mean, it was a little tougher for me between those two. And then there's some separation, and Leonard Moore was kind of my next thought. But I don't know that they would go to a 4th corner that early. If, right now, I think it'd probably be the 3. But, but he's the guy that I could see force his way into the rotation. And all of a sudden, you're like, wow, Leonard Moore had 3 picks this year and, ended up being a really important backup kind of thing. So, those were really my main ones. Sevillano, afterthought, but still at least considered it. Those 3, and I think Kingston is at the top of the list for me, just as more of an effective every down player, and more of he's a 2 where Bryce is a 3 right now. That's a factor on as well. And I did not take into account special teams. A lot of people in the chat are taking special teams, and I don't think it's as much of a no-brainer on special teams because I could very much see Bryce Young being a Isaiah Foskey type of guy. As remember his first year in the rotation where he didn't play a whole lot and they put him on special teams and he's long and athletic and all that. I could see Bryce blocking a kick. I think both of those guys could make an impact on special teams. But I would agree that if you're going to count special teams, Kingston's probably going to be more of a every unit starter type of guy than Bryce Young might just make an impact on one of them. That's kind of where I'm at. So that would be my pick as the top newcomer on defense. So we've had – 2, 3 so far that were the same top? No, you went different role player. Did you go with Jadarian on your top role player on offense?
Faison.
Okay, so we agreed on the 2 defensive newcomers. That's the one we've agreed on so far. Good. Okay, good stuff.
Top lineman is next on the list, Brian. So defensively, let's start on the defensive side of the ball. Who's your top lineman?
Riley Mills. Look, I'll be short and simple. You guys know how much I think of Riley Mills as a talent. Well, you guys also know that I very much have said he's got to show it on an every down basis.
Sure.
I just think he is. This is a projection pick for me. I just think he's poised for a dominant year. I think he's going to be their best overall defensive lineman. Numbers wise, impact wise, how teams have to game plan for him. I think by the time we get to Florida State's biggest concern is how do we block 99. I think that's going to be how it goes. Now they're both going to be very good. But I just have a feeling this is the breakout for Riley Mills. So that's my pick there.
And I had the same pick. So I'm right with you. He's got all the potential in the world. I think he came back for a reason. I think he's on a mission. And I think he is absolutely going to break out this year. I'm very excited to see what Riley Mills does. So that was my pick as well. Offensively, I have a feeling we're going to be the same here as well. But I will let you pick your offensive lineman of the year.
This might have been a little tougher if Jagasol didn't get hurt.
Agreed.
And I still don't think it's a no-brainer because I think Ashton Craig could be in this conversation as well, but I'm going Billy Schrauth.
That's
who what we saw from him in the spring, what we've seen from him so far in fall camp.
Yeah.
He's just physically way better than anybody else that's in the starting lineup right now. Just his combination of athleticism, power. He's got experience. I'm going with him. My number 2 would probably be Ashton Craig.
Yep, me too. Look, I have never hid my love for Ashton Craig. I think he's going to be very, very good. I love his athleticism. I think he's gonna be a really, really good center. I really, really do. But Billy Schrauth is just Billy Schrauth. Like I couldn't in good conscience not pick Billy Schrauth here, even though I love Ashton Craig and what I think he's going to do, and it would have been a projection pick, but I just can't go past Billy Shroud. I mean, he's the pick.
Hey, Vince, that was the Cam Hart fan club calling.
I knew it.
And they're very concerned about your recent infatuation with Ashton Craig, and they're wondering if maybe you're kind of fading away from that. If, like, Cam's now at the NFL and you've now, turned your back on him a little bit. But
I mean, I have to focus on Notre Dame, but I'm still waiting for my my Cam Hart Chargers jersey so that I can rock that on Sundays. But
now you could be right. Here's my sleeper for top lineman. You want to hear? Here's my sleeper pick.
Okay,
Rocco Spindler.
Okay.
Now I'm not going there now, but if he does enough, because I think Joe Rudolph wants to start Pat Coogan. That's what I think he
completely agree. Completely agree.
If Rocco does enough to force Joe Rudolph to start him, I think Rocco could be in line for a really good
because
season.
he'd almost have to do more.
Yeah.
He has to be markedly better than Coogan to start, I think, right now. I mean, it has to be obvious to everybody. That's the position that I think that he's in. And you're right. If he does end up winning that battle because of that, then I think there's a really good chance that he has a breakout year. Yeah, I could see that.
I'm hoping that at the end of the year, the answer is actually Tosh Baker. That's what I'm hoping.
Well, that would be fantastic. That would,
But,
I mean, you want to talk about solidifying a line, that would definitely do it. So,
yes.
Top skill player is our next one. And I will say,
quarterback does not count in this one. Did you have a quarterback on yours? Okay, you can keep a quarterback on yours, Vince. I was trying to save you from not having a QB because I thought you'd have a QB on a later one. So if you had a QB, you can go with that one.
So I was going to say my difficulty here was trying to stick to my own rule and not having more than one person, or more than one award for one person, right? And so I just bit the bullet, and I because originally I didn't have an offensive player here. Okay, I only had a defensive player.
Would it help you to stick to your own rule if I do say you can't have a quarterback here, because then you could have the quarterback for something later?
It would,
okay,
but then I don't know who else I would go with because I've got other skill players.
Let me kick it off, and I think you're going to be on board with me. Okay,
hit me.
My top skill player this year is going to be in skill players: running back, receiver, tight end. That's how in Notre Dame's offense, I view those as skill players.
Fair enough.
It's Jeremiah Love.
Okay.
Like that's my top skill player, just because he's going to do everything for Notre Dame. He's going to be a top rusher. He's going to be a pass catcher. He's going to be a home run weapon. I just think he is going to be. And in my head, I'm not counting quarterback as a skill player this conversation.
Yeah, no, I
just
get that,
because we have that guy in some other areas. But in he is a skill player. The quarterback would be. I'm just going Jeremiah Love. I just think he's going to be just a really impactful difference maker type of guy.
I've got Jeremiah later for a different award. So I'm not going to pick Jeremiah Love. I'm not sure who I'm going to go with here. I had Riley Leonard written down because I assumed he was going to be a skill player.
Yeah, go with it.
Yeah,
good. Go with it. I didn't tell you it couldn't be beforehand, so you can pick one now.
Look, Riley Leonard is going to be the catalyst for whether this offense is what we think the offense could be. I mean, and I know that's obvious because he's the quarterback, and I get that, but it still doesn't make it not true. You know what I mean? He will be the reason that the run game is effective early on, okay, because they're still trying to figure out offensive line and how that's going to go. He is going to be the reason that the passing game is what it is, okay? Now, are there other quarterbacks that can throw and do some? Yes, there are, but he's the best combination that they have, and he's dynamic in both, in my opinion. And so he's the top skill player for me. And yeah, that's why I went with him. So, just breaking rules. It's what I do.
That's all good, man. It's all good. How about defense, Vince?
Yeah. For me, this one was a no-brainer. I went with Benjamin Morrison. I mean, this is the one spot where I put him. He had to be a top of the hill guy because he is a top of the hill guy. Like Ben Morrison, maybe he's not going to have the stats and all of these different, it doesn't matter. His stat is going to be, don't throw in my direction or you're going to regret it. Like that's his stat. And he's still going to be that dude in the secondary. And so he is my top skill guy for that spot.
Same. I just think he's going to be excellent, even if he misses the opener. And I don't anticipate him missing the opener.
I don't either.
I think Benjamin's poised for just a monster season. I really
Yeah.
do. He's a very focused young man. Like, I don't think he cares about like all the press clippings. I think he's just locked in on being the best player he can be.
Yeah.
And this was not as easy as I thought, because you have Xavier Watts, who's a dynamic player, and
100%.
And I count linebackers in this conversation as well. So I thought about Jack Kaiser, thought about Greg Cohen. But at the end of the day, I just think Benjamin Morrison is going to be their best football player. I think Benjamin Morrison could be their best football player, period. Like, entire team, he could end up being your best player.
Correct.
And so he certainly is the best skill player for me. So that one was an easy one for me as well.
Breakout player. Now, we've talked about breakout players in the past, and we always talked about how we have the different levels of breakout players and things like that. And this one is going to be the top level of breakout player. Okay. So it's going to be somebody that, could have contributed last year, but is going to break out as one of the better players on the team, get national recognition, that kind of stuff. Not saying they're going to go out and win a national award, but national recognition. Like, when they talk about Notre Dame, they're going to talk about these guys. And so that's kind of the threshold here. So since you went first last time, I'll lead off here, just to kind of go back and forth. So my breakout player offensively is somebody that you've already talked about for all the same reasons. It's Jeremiah Love. I think he is going to be on the mind and the lips of national people, and it's not going to take long. His skill set is amazing, and he is going to help this offense. He is going to, at times, bail out the offense, I think. And he is also at times going to put the offense on his shoulders. Like, he has the ability to do all of that. And, pass game, run game, all of it. I'm a huge Jeremiah Love fan, and I think he is going to carry the torch for this offense at times.
I'm going same class, different position.
Okay.
I'm going Jaden Greathouse.
Nice.
He's also partly why I'm not predicting any of the other receivers for anything else. Right? Just because I think he's going to become the guy. Now, your role player thing's a different conversation, but
for sure.
Look, I've been on this kick for a while, and I'm going to be on it till I get proven wrong or proven right. I just think Jaden Greathouse is going to be their best receiver this year. And he also has always just struck me as a guy that's always going to be at his best in the biggest moments.
Right.
And I just think that's going to help him a lot this year too. He may not lead the team in catches. He may not lead the team in receptions, but he's going to be their best receiver. And he's a guy that caught 18 passes last year. So I think he's going to see a huge jump in production, and he's just going to be their best receiver. I need to see that he's not, and what we saw from him in the spring was just like, it was so 100%. Very clear that he was their best receiver. Now, again, they didn't have Bo Collins in the spring, and Jaden Thomas was banged up in the spring, and Jordan Faison was playing lacrosse. I get all that, but just, they did have Chris Mitchell there and KK and those other guys. And I just felt Jaden Greathouse was clearly their best receiver. Now, the thing that's encouraged me, there's two things that have encouraged me, and they go hand in hand. Number one is Jaden has built on his spring so far in fall camp from what we've seen. Okay. Number two, he's not so significantly their best guy now as he was in the spring, because Chris Mitchell's getting more comfortable, and because Bo Collins
arrived,
and because Jordan Faison's there. Like, it's not as obvious it was, and Jaden Thomas has had a really good fall camp.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So, like, a lot of the things that made it's like he was so much better than everybody else. Thomas was injured. Chris Mitchell was kind of still feeling his way into the offense. No Bo Collins and no Faison. And he was so clearly their best receiver. He hasn't taken a step back at all. It's just overall the rest of the room is elevated in fall camp. So that's a good thing. But I still think at the end of the day, he's their best. He's their best. He's their best receiver, and will be the breakout for Notre Dame. It's kind of like you, Vince. Like, it's like, okay, skill player. If my top skill player is Jeremiah Love, how's he not? Because I don't know that Jeremiah Love breaking out is going to surprise as many people as Jaden Greathouse. I think it's almost assumed by people that Jeremiah Love's going to break out.
That's fair.
So that's kind of why I went this direction.
Defensively, I'll let you lead this one off. Who do you think is going to be the breakout player on defense?
This is the one award, the one superlative that I could not go with just one guy.
Oh,
and so I'm going with one position, sort of, but I'm not going with one guy. look, man, there's going to be sort of a almost like a law firm type of situation, right? Like B&B, you know what I mean? Trial attorneys, it's going to be B&B. It's Boubacar and Burnham. I just think their addition to this lineup is going to have such an impact on this football team. If those two kids are and they're almost going to be somewhat indistinguishable from another because of that impact that I think they're going to have.
Okay.
Josh is going to be more of the all-around guy. I think Boubacar is going to be the flashy pass rusher, but they're going to be two guys that make a ton of plays on the defensive line. And adding them to the line compared to what it was last year is going to be something that, to me, elevates this overall defensive line to where it's just going to be special. It's going to be elite. And I think it's almost sort of it needs to be them as well, in my opinion, just for how I view this season, because that's the one thing that was lacking from this football team last year was that really dynamic edge rusher. Yes, Javonte Jean-Baptiste did some really nice things, and he was good in the biggest moments, but he wasn't a guy that struck fear into your hearts.
Right.
I think Boubacar and Burnham have a chance to be even more dynamic and impactful as pass rushers. And if they bring that, I mean, I have these two kids, in my season projections combining for 10 sacks. As a duo, not each one individually, but as a duo. I think they're going to add 10 plus sacks to this defensive line. And I think that's going to be huge. There's a lot of B's that are important in this defensive situation, Vince. I mean, Burnham, Boubacar, Patelho, Bowen, it's just it's great. It's a great name to have, right? Benjamin, just a lot of B's. A lot of B's. Bryce, there's a lot of B's in there, man.
It's going to let you go.
It's a lot of B's. A lot of B's.
So my defensive breakout player is Christian Gray. I think that he's going to take a major step this year. And because of everything I said about Benjamin Morrison and how they're going to avoid him, I think Christian Gray is going to have an opportunity to really make a splash.
Problem is, Vince, he has no B in his name.
I know.
I'm going to have to reach out to Chandra and ask if his middle name starts with a B.
I bet you it says on his on his thing. I'm going to have to look now. Yeah, they usually have their middle names under the personal. But anyway. Yeah. So bottom line is I think Christian Gray is set up beautifully to make an impact this year and become just an absolute breakout player. He's going to make some plays that I think he already has made plays that you're just like, okay, wow. Mm-hmm. And now he's going to get more of an opportunity to make even more of those plays. Yeah, I'm excited about what Christian Gray is going to be able to do.
I'm actually texting his mom right now.
To find out what his middle name is?
Yes, to find out what his middle name is.
If it starts with a B, I'm done. I'm out. I'm out. It's going to be a mic drop moment.
That's a good pick, Vince. That's a very good pick. Very good pick. And unlike the others, he's got a better shot to start, in my opinion.
True. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, we're going to get into our big ones now. So, most outstanding on offense.
Am I going to start?
Yeah, I can if you want.
No, usually you're like, okay, here's where we're going. And I'm waiting on you to okay, lead into it. So most outstanding and most valuable are two different things to me. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when people don't confuse valuable, when they talk about the NFL MVP, and it's this guy had this many yards and this many stats.
That's most outstanding.
That's most outstanding. This is most valuable. Valuable means you take this guy off the team who is the most valuable.
Correct.
Combined with dominant. I mean, there needs to be a level of dominance, but most valuable.
Yep.
And so
I feel very good about my pick.
Pat Mahomes is a better quarterback than Josh Allen, but I think Kansas City could win a lot more games without Pat Mahomes than Buffalo could win without Josh Allen. Right. So that's the debate right there.
Okay.
And so for me, my most outstanding is very obvious. It's Riley Leonard. I think he's going to be their best offensive football player. I think his ability to dominate the run, dominate the pass, how teams have to defend him, he's just going to be an impact player. And it was not necessarily an easy pick because of Jeremiah Love and Jaden Greathouse and Chris Mitchell and all these other players. But when I just think about who is the most dominant football player they have, I think it's Riley Leonard. I think for this season, I think that's who it's going to be. If he's healthy for all season, I think he's going to be a big-time player for Notre Dame. And I don't even mean most valuable. I mean most outstanding. He's going to be their most dominant football player, is my opinion.
Well, I picked a guy who is going to be catching passes from Riley Leonard, and it is now a repeat of somebody that you already had. It's Jaden Greathouse. I'm on board with Jaden Greathouse being a dude, to be honest with you. And I do think that Chris Mitchell is going to get a lot of attention, which I think is going to allow Jaden Greathouse to absolutely just dominate. I mean, he is going to have a year, and you're right. He was clearly the best receiver that they had in the spring, and now that they've added some pieces and some parts and things like that, the gap has closed. But I still think he's going to be dominant. I really do. And even if they decide that he's the guy that they need to bracket and double, I think Mike Denbrock is going to be smart about moving him around and getting some advantageous matchups to allow Jaden Greathouse to continue his dominance, regardless of whatever a defense wants to do to him. I still think he's going to be that guy. And so he's my most outstanding for offense. Now, and the reason I don't have him as my MVP is because I do think that they are super deep at wide receiver, and I'm not saying they could replace him. That's different. I'm saying that they could. It won't be like a Grand
They're going to still be
Canyon-sized
really
hole.
good if they.
Right.
Yes, there's not a single receiver they could lose that just
Correct.
devastates them the way that it was the case in the past.
Which is why I put him at most outstanding, and I don't have him as MVP, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. So
Totally agree. Totally
so that's my offensive guy. Most outstanding on the defense, I did go with Howard Cross III here. I don't have him anywhere else, and I also understand that the logic portion of the program doesn't make sense here, since I have Riley Mills as my most outstanding lineman. I get it. Logic and I don't usually run into the same bar together. But so Howard Cross III, I think, kind of for the same reason that Riley Mills is going to have a good year. Look, Howard Cross came back for a reason, right? He's got some unfinished business that he wants to take care of. He's motivated. He's got a chip on his shoulder. There's certain things that he wants to do. I think, I don't know that he can have a better season than he had last year. I don't know if that's possible, right? Because his stature is going to prevent him from maybe being that top interior lineman picked in the draft and some things like that. That's all out of his control, right? But I think if he stacks two really good seasons, two elite seasons on top of each other, then I think some teams are going to not ignore that, but be like, oh, well, you know what? This wasn't a one-year fluke. This is something that he can do on a regular basis. And so I think that he is going to kind of elevate himself in that way. And so I think he has some things to prove. And so I that's why I have Howard Cross here.
Quick interjection. Sadly, sad to report that Christian Garay's middle name does not start with a B.
Oh,
I really thought.
At least you get me for part 3.
Yeah, it's close. It starts with an A. Does not start with a B.
All right.
So
that's hilarious, by the way.
So unfortunately, there's not. I mean, Christian and then his middle name and then Gray. There's no B's in there. So I'm going to have to talk to his mom, and we're going to have to maybe legally get an additional middle name thrown in there for the purposes of this season.
That's so funny.
So no B in Christian Gray. He's the one outlier to that conversation. Vince, my most outstanding guy is Riley Leonard or Riley Mills. I went all Rileys on most outstanding. I'm going Riley on both sides of the ball.
True.
So I went Riley Leonard on offense, Riley Mills on defense for the same reasons I talked about before. I just think he's going to be a huge force. And again, I just think it comes down to, I think Benjamin Morrison could end up being their best overall player, most dominant player, best player. But I think you can avoid him. And I think teams are going to avoid him like the plague this season.
Exactly.
Which is going to limit his direct impact.
Sure.
The thing about a guy like Riley Leonard is he can not only be impacted by how teams have to defend him and how that helps his teammates, but then he is going to have a chance to make more plays.
Right.
And that's why I went with him as most outstanding. It's just because I just don't know that Benjamin, like when I talk about best skill player, I can just talk about just dominance at your position. They couldn't catch any balls on him and that kind of stuff. And you just avoid him the whole game. Like, why didn't Benjamin give up any throws this game? Because they never threw at him. They're going to have games like that, I think, this year. But I just feel like Riley Mills is just poised for a big-time season. But you could easily have picked Benjamin Morrison in this conversation as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Just most outstanding. And I actually don't have Howard Cross on any of these, which to me is not because I'm underrating Howard Cross. It's just that's how good I think this defense is going to be. And he doesn't apply for a lot of these. But it also comes down to, because of the impact or the breakout that I'm anticipating from Riley Mills.
Sure.
I think that's kind of where he is. So I'm going Riley Mills. And I just think both of these two guys, part of the reason I went with them too, Vince, is a little bit of projection, because I started thinking about like who playing at their highest level has the biggest impact on this team. And it came down to those two, Riley Leonard and Riley Mills. I just think those two guys, if they play to their potential, have a bigger impact on success week after week than anybody else. A dominant 3 technique and a dominant quarterback are, two recipes to a championship that a team needs. Not saying Notre Dame, just in general, that a team needs for most teams. And that's why partly why I went with those two guys as well, to be honest with you.
Final award to give out, MVP, most valuable player. You kind of laid out your criteria for the difference between outstanding and valuable. I completely agree. I'm very, very secure in my decision, but do you want to lead off the MVP talk?
Go ahead.
So I, from an MVP standpoint, most valuable to the team, this is where I went with Riley Leonard. Mm-hmm. And for everything that I said before when I was talking about Riley Leonard, he's going to be such an integral part in the run game, especially early on. I think he's going to be an integral part in the pass game. He's the one throwing the ball. He's just dynamic. He's a dynamic athlete. I think he's a dynamic personality within the team, which I think is a huge part of it. I think he is super valuable to this team, which is an interesting thing to say when he's only been here since January, but I feel like he's already made his mark with this team. And I'm not going to be in any way surprised if he's got a C on his jersey as a captain. I think he is an absolutely valuable piece of this offense and this team. So not just, I think it transcends offense and defense. I think he's a leader on this team. He's super laid back. I think he's an easy guy to follow. I feel really good about him in this role. Now, they've got a lot of talent in the quarterback room. We've talked about this, but we've also talked about the fact that if Riley Leonard goes down, then so do the expectations of the team to a degree, depending on, who is inserted. And so that's why I think he's most valuable to the team. I think his absence directly affects the win-losses for this team. So Riley Leonard's my MVP.
I don't disagree with anything you just said. I think he's brilliant. I went somewhere else, though. Partly because okay. I didn't necessarily want to have the same guy for most outstanding and most valuable.
Totally get that.
And mine is Mitchell Evans. And here's why I'm going Mitchell Evans.
I like that. I wanted to find a spot for him in this, and I couldn't.
Here's why I go with Mitchell Evans, because is he going to be their most dynamic? No. Is he going to necessarily be their best skill guy that you look at the NFL draft and he was taken higher than anybody else? No. Is he going to lead the team in catches? Probably not. Is he going to lead the team in yards? Probably not. Is he going to lead the team in touchdowns? Probably not. But I don't know if there's another skill player that can have a greater impact on everything around him than Mitchell Evans. And what I mean by that is, Mike Denbrock set some very good tight ends over the years. I don't know that he's had one that is potentially as good as what Mitchell Evans can be. And if Mitchell Evans is able to step up and be as good as he was last year for an entire season, even if he misses the first couple games, but then comes back and he's healthy, if they have him for the second half of the year and the postseason and he's playing like he was last year before he got hurt, that has such an impact on this football team. It's harder to defend the run game. It's harder to defend the read zone, because now you could potentially have situations where Mitchell Evans is to the right and they're running read zone where Riley's running to the left. And it's kind of like you're now middle of your field is worried about all that stuff. It impacts how you defend the running backs in the pass game. Like, can you really put your best safety / linebacker / nickel on Jaden Greathouse or Jeremiah Love if Mitchell Evans is ripping you up? It impacts your outside receivers. 3rd and 7, your safeties are peeking a little bit down more into the box to defend number 88. And, oh, shoot, we didn't give enough help to number 10 running that post right over top, or number 5, or number 1, or number 11, or number 6, or number 83. You get what I'm saying? I think Mitchell Evans is that guy that is just going to be, he's like that final glue piece. He's not their most talented. He's not their most outstanding. He's very good, and he is talented. Don't get me wrong, but he's not so much head and shoulders above everyone else like Michael Mayer was, partly because the roster around him is better than it was when Michael Mayer was here 2 years ago. It's just overall, I think he brings something that, and honestly, as much as I love the next 2 tight ends, I don't think they impact the game this year as much as the way Mitchell can. You know, like if you take Jeremiah Love away from the backfield, he's, most outstanding or breakout or wherever you want to put him, he's going to be dynamic. But if they lose him and it's Jadarian Price and Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams and Devin Ford, you're still pretty flipping good at running back. You said it at receiver. If you lose Chris Mitchell, you still have Jordan Faison and KK Smith and Cam Williams. If you lose Jaden Greathouse, you still have Jaden Harrison. You can easily move Jordan Faison into the slot. You can move Jaden Thomas over to the slot. You have a lot of guys who can play slot. If you lose Jaden Thomas in the boundary, you've got Bo Collins and Micah Gilbert. If you lose Bo Collins, you still have Jaden Thomas and Micah Gilbert. Quarterback and tight end are the 2 positions where I think you have a guy at that position that can just do things that nobody else on the roster can do at that position and impact the game in a way that nobody else can do at that position. That's just kind of why I went with Mitchell Evans there. If he's healthy and productive, he has an impact on this offense that makes Notre Dame incredibly difficult to depend because of what they have around him.
Sure.
And that's kind of where I look at it.
I dig it.
His ability just think about how he was against Ohio State last year. Just some of the plays he made against Ohio State and how dominant he was. I mean, you take him off Notre Dame's team last year, they don't beat Duke.
Right.
Because they're not in position for it to even be a game that's a 1-point game on that final drive anyway. He was their offense against Duke last year. His numbers against Louisville ended up being pretty good, Vince, even though they had a 30-plus yard gain taken away from him, where he smoked the defense for a 30-yard gain. It got called back because you had a penalty on Blake Fisher. His numbers would have been even better at that point in time. And I just look at him and I think if he's going off, he has such an incredible impact on the entire team that I just don't know that anybody outside of Riley Leonard brings a more impactful nature to it as far as value. And that's kind of why I went with him. And again, you could have easily gone Riley Leonard, but to your point, I didn't want to have the same guy.
No, I get it.
As after I get done saying there's a difference between most valuable, and then I'm like, okay, who is your MVP and who's your MOP? And for both of them, it's like the same dude. It's like, okay, dude, maybe you should shut up. So that's how
it's all good. That's gonna do it for part 2 of our.
We didn't do defense.
MVP is most valuable for the whole team. Yeah. That's why I did it.
No, we're going offense and defense.
Did not have a defensive one. So,
okay. Well, I'll answer mine, and I think you're going to agree with mine.
Okay.
Xavier Watts. And there's a lot of reasons why.
Yep.
Is he an outstanding player?
That's
yes,
where I would have gone.
Is he a guy that can impact the game and can he impact the pass game and the run game? Absolutely. Is he a leader on the defense? Absolutely. But here's the other thing. When you talk about value, nobody on at the safety position can do what he does. I think Benjamin Morrison might be their best defensive player. I think him and Christian Gray are very similar players. He's just a year older. And if you lose Benjamin, that would suck, but you're not going to be crushed because you do have a Christian Gray that you can slide into that spot.
Right.
If you lose Xavier Watts, the safety position takes a huge, huge step back. And then when you do have him, the impact he has on your defense as a whole is huge. Because the way he played the game last year, it changes how you attack Notre Dame.
100%.
It does. And he'll force you into mistakes to someone else because you don't want to throw at him. I can maybe fit that ball in there, but man, Xavier Watts is right over there. I don't know if I want to do that because he'll not only pick passes off, but what has he also showed last year? If you make any kind of mistake, slightly sail a ball against a tight end, USC, right? Ball gets tipped, Clemson. He's there to pick it off and do damage with it. And that's the thing is he doesn't just pick passes off. He picks them off and goes with them. And then he goes back to his old receiver days. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing I look at with Xavier Watts and say that kid brings value. But the other thing is too, is if there's one player on the entire defense, Xavier Watts last year had 137 yards on interception return yards last season, by the way. And he also had, well, they didn't count it, but he also had those return yards against USC that they didn't count, that he returned that one for a touchdown.
Oh, yeah.
So if there's one player on defense that you could say you can least afford to lose, where there's a big drop off between 1 and 2, it's field safety. It's Xavier Watts.
And that's the definition of MVP. Like that's why I picked Riley Leonard for offense, and that's why I would have picked, and I guess did, pick Xavier Watts for defense. Completely agree with you. You take him out of the mix, and you that's a giant hole. That's a giant hole, right? And it's not saying anything negative about the guys that are on the depth chart or whatever, but he is an established All-American, best defensive player in the country. You lose him, that's massive.
Well,
massive.
And they're just not in the depth chart, is not in a position where you can afford to lose him.
Exactly.
I mean, what you do is you move either Adon or Rod Hurt over there, and those two start, and that's fine. But now your depth chart behind it is just not as good.
Agreed.
And that's a huge difference to me. So that is my prediction for who the most valuable player will be this year is Xavier Watts.
Beautiful. That is going to do it for part 2 of our show today, the superlatives, right? So make sure you check that out if you missed it. We do have another section coming up, so make sure you stay tuned. But in the meantime, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and of course, jump on the boards. boards.irishbreakdown.com. Always good stuff over there, and you'll never know about it if you're not a member. So boards.irishbreakdown.com. Part 3 of today's discussion is our season predictions. And this is where we are going to get into our prediction for the win-loss record. We'll go through the schedule. We're going to do some other fun things like that. And then, of course, the postseason prediction and where we think Notre Dame is going to end up. If you're looking for the full bracket prediction, nationally, that's going to be tomorrow. And so you're going to have to tune in tomorrow to find out who's going to be around Notre Dame.
We thought about just doing that one now, and then we would still do our one on Saturday. But it's like, it kind of made no sense to do the national one since we're going to be talking about what we're thinking Notre Dame if we don't. Absolutely. So that factored into the conversation as well.
Yep. So this is just a Notre Dame centered, Notre Dame specific kind of season prediction part of the show. And again, we'll do the full bracket tomorrow and what we think is going to happen, all the conference champions and all of that, and we'll fill out our bracket, and it'll be kind of a bracketology fun show tomorrow. But so for right now, let's talk about Notre Dame. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the season schedule, Bryan, and what that looks like, and the wins, the losses, and whatever your prediction happens to be. So do you want to go through it game by game and decide wins and losses and then get to our season record, or how do you want to do it?
Well, let's just talk overall about the record because I have I don't have a specific team that I have them losing to.
Correct. Completely agree.
Or like if I went 1 through 12 and said I think they're going to be that team, that team, that team, that team, and that team, I'd have them at 12-0.
Correct. They should be and will be, in my opinion, favored in every game this season.
Well, they won't be favored against A&M, but they should be.
That's what I'm saying. They should be.
Opinion. Yeah.
It's ridiculous that they're not, but that's a betting thing. That's a separate. That's not I think this team is better than this team. This is, we need to get bets on both sides so that we don't lose all our shirts. That's what that is. And so
here's what factors in schedule wise for me, Vince, because this is a tougher schedule than I believe a lot of Notre Dame fans are giving it credit for. But I'm not also going to sit here and argue that this is a gauntlet of a schedule. But here's what it comes down to for me. Going undefeated is hard.
Yes.
It's very hard.
Agreed.
Nick Saban won 7 national titles. Only 2 of them were undefeated, I believe, right? And one of them was the COVID year. And then his first title at Alabama. That's it. So I believe he won 6 titles at Alabama, correct? He won in 09, won in 11, won in 12, won in 15, and won in 17, and won in 19, or won in 20, right? So that's 6. Am I counting that correctly at Alabama? 6 at Bama? And then he won 1 at LSU. And as I said, he only had one undefeated season. I mean, 2 undefeated seasons. So his LSU team lost a game that year. His 11 Bama team lost at home to LSU. His 12 Alabama team lost to Texas A&M. His 15 Alabama team lost to Ole Miss. His 17 Bama team lost to Auburn. So, it's very hard to go undefeated. It just is. And, Georgia went undefeated, their second title, I believe, was an undefeated team. No. Their second title team, I believe, was undefeated, correct? They went 15-0, I believe, in 2022.
It sounds right.
But their first title team was not. They got smacked in the SEC title game by Alabama, who then they beat in a rematch. And Alabama's 22 title team, as good as it was, it wasn't exactly because the East has been down, it wasn't like the gauntlet that some people make it out to be, and they didn't have to play Alabama that year because LSU beat Alabama, played in the SEC title. So you go undefeated in the SEC and you don't have to play Bama. There's a little bit of an asterisk there for me for your undefeated season. But they beat a really good Oregon team that year, beat Ohio State by a point, beat TCU. They beat an LSU team, beat Tennessee, who was really good that year. So, but his better team was 21, who lost a game. Ohio State in 2014 won a national title, went 14-1, lost at home to a Virginia Tech team by 2 touchdowns that went 7-6. Clemson's first championship since 1981. I think it was 1981, right? I think Danny Ford won a national title in 1981. But, that team had some great wins. That 2016 Clemson team, Vince, that won a national title, if you remember, with Deshaun Watson and a great defense. That team went out that year and beat number 3 Louisville and Lamar Jackson, went on the road and beat number 12 Florida State, beat Auburn on the road to start the season, beat a ranked Virginia Tech team, beat number 3 Ohio State in the national title semifinal 31-0, and beat Bama in the national championship game. Lost at home to Pitt, 8-5 Pitt in November. Got beat by Pat Narduzzi at home. 2017 Clemson, who had 2 losses. One was to Alabama, the national title team, and the other one was at Syracuse, went 4-8. 2019 Georgia, great team, beat Notre Dame, went 12-2 that year, finished top 10, lost at home to a 4-8 South Carolina team. Point is, stuff happens. You're going to lose games. I mean, Urban Meyer had some of those games. So you're playing a schedule that is challenging week after week. It's not a gauntlet. It's not like the 1988 season where you had to play 4 top 10 teams. It's not that. But there's a lot of teams that can sneak up on you in any given week and knock you off. And as I've said before, and I'll stick to it again, I have no undefeated teams in the Power 4 level, and I do consider Notre Dame a Power 4 level. Like that's where I'm at. I think everybody loses a game this season. And I think Notre Dame is no different. Now, if you're going to tell me who that's going to be, I can't tell you who that's going to be because if I go through each game individually, they should win every game. Like that, you know what I mean? So like that's the challenge of picking the schedule, Vince, is that right there. So that's why it was and I've had some years where I've picked them to go undefeated because I predicted what they should do. And if I'm going to predict what they should do based on their roster versus everybody else's, then 12-0 is where they should be. I'm trying to be a little bit more, okay, I'm trying to predict what I think they will do, which I don't normally do. And it could end up biting me in the butt because knowing my luck, this will be the one year they actually do go undefeated, you know what I mean? And I predict it. But that's kind of where I'm at, Vince. When you look at their schedule overall, the reason that I have it the way that I have it is because I just don't know who they're going to be. So
right,
that's why we're not doing the schedule by schedule thing this year.
Good.
I will
because
say
I didn't have an answer for that either, and I have them at 11-1.
Let's get into it. That's your prediction. So just regular season, that's where we're at. We're both at 11-1.
That's what I wrote down.
Who they're going to lose to, but that's what my record is.
I put 11-1, and then I put a question mark because I put who do they lose to? Question mark. I don't know. And that's just being honest. I mean, the college football season is it's wild, right? I mean, even in the NFL, no undefeated team wins the Super Bowl. That hasn't happened since 1972 with the Dolphins, right? And, it can happen in college. Could Notre Dame do it? Sure. It's a possibility. They have the talent to do it, but it's just such an up and down type of season.
I won't be shocked if they do it.
No.
Like, I'll say that. Like, I won't be surprised if they go 12-0.
And if they lose a game, I'm going to be upset because it's a game that they should have won. Like that's absolutely how I feel right now, but I'm not comfortable with, there's a bunch of new faces, obviously, we got some new coaches that there's just a lot of unknowns right now that I'm not comfortable saying 12-0. And I don't want it also to sound like super homerish either. Like, oh, they're going to win every game and it's not even going to be close. Like that just sounds crazy to me. So while I do think Notre Dame is
crazy, I think it's totally fair if somebody like this year more than other years, picking 12-0 does not take as much projection as needed. Like I think I picked Notre Dame to go. Like we were talking. Remember recently on a podcast we were asked what was the season you got most right and season you got most wrong.
Sure.
And I talked about how 2009 I was really wrong. I thought that team was going to be really good. I think I picked that team to go 12-0. And again, it was because I projected what they should do. But in order to get there, I had to make a lot of but, ifs.
Right.
The only if I have for this team to finish undefeated is if they're as good as they're supposed to be.
Right.
That's it. There's not a lot of buts if they just don't hurt themselves. Because website-wise, I believe this team – did I say website? Because you just texted me.
Sorry, that was an accident.
Roster-wise,
yeah.
I said website because you just texted me something that said website. Roster-wise, I think they have a better roster than everybody that they play. Having said that, it's not enormous. Do I think they have a better roster than Texas A&M? Yes, I do.
Right.
Do I think it's enormously better? No, I don't. I think they have a better roster than Florida State. Is it by a big margin? No, it isn't. Am I going to argue with you for 20 minutes if you say otherwise? No, I'm not.
Sure.
Same thing with USC. Same thing with Louisville.
Yeah.
And then there's other teams that are good enough to where if you have an off game, which everybody has off days, that's why we're talking about it's hard to go undefeated. It's hard to show up mentally and technically and deep at your best every single day.
100%.
Every single week. I mean, like I said, Nick Saban, greatest coach of our generation. And I don't think that's arguable. Like for a while there was close. I thought him and Urban were kind of neck and neck for a while. Saban won a title first. Then Urban won, 2 at Florida. Then Saban tied him in 2009, passed him with 11 and 12. Then Urban won again in 2014. And you're like, okay, it's back and forth. After 2014, Saban just pulled ahead and Urban never got the most out, and then he was out. But if you look at how great Nick Saban was and all the great teams that he had in his career, again, he had 2 seasons where his team went undefeated. That's it. I mean, from 2001 to 2023, with the 5 and 6 seasons out because he's in the NFL, Nick Saban won a minimum of 10 games in all but 3 seasons. 2002 at LSU, 2004 at LSU, where they went 9-3, probably would have gone 10-3 if he didn't leave before the bowl game. And then the first year at Bama, they went 7-6. Since then, they won 12, 14, 10, 12, 13, 11, 12, 14, 14, 13, 14, 11, 13, 13, 11, and 12 games. He had 2 undefeated seasons in that time. That's it. He had more 2-loss seasons at Bama than he had 0-loss seasons at Alabama. So, but do I think this team can go undefeated? Yes, I do.
Yeah, I do too.
Because they don't play the SEC West like Saban did all those years. That's also part of it. But that's kind of where I'm at, Vince. And it's hard to go undefeated, but I do think this team is capable of it. I'm just not going to predict it, but I won't be shocked if it happens. I will say that. And one other thing too, Pete Carroll, as great and dominant as he was at USC, had 1 undefeated season. That's it.
Yeah.
1. The first year they won a title, they lost a game. Right. And then that great 2005 team obviously lost to Texas. That was a little different because at least that was in the postseason. But when I point out Saban's title teams, the reason that those have more impact is because if you won the title, you didn't lose in the postseason. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that's kind of how I looked at it. But Notre Dame has had 3 undefeated regular seasons in the last 15 years. So it's certainly possible.
Right.
It's just if I'm predicting it, I can't go there. I'm 11-1, but I also could not tell you who they're going to lose to. I do think if you were to say who are the teams are most likely to lose to, just in order of the schedule, I would say Texas A&M, Louisville, Georgia Tech, Florida State, and USC. Those are the 5 I think that have the best shot in order of knocking Notre Dame off.
Interesting.
I will be shocked if it's a Purdue, if it's a
yeah.
Virginia, if it's a Stanford. That'll shock me.
Sure.
But if they have this big emotional win over a good Florida State, and maybe at USC's got 3-4 losses, and they're that's their Super Bowl, and they're not playing for there's a lot of those things that could factor into it, and that's why I have them where I have them.
Postseason. Here's where the rubber meets the road, right? And what Notre Dame does in the postseason is going to, frankly, decide whether this season was a success or not. And it's also going to decide, in my opinion, whether this program has taken a step or not. And there's 2 different kinds of steps that they can take, in my opinion. There's the Marcus Freeman step, as in, okay, they did better than last year. The arrow is still pointing up. It's kind of like what we talked about in part 1, right? It's the bare minimum to keep the arrow pointing in a positive direction. Still the guy, that kind of stuff. To, it's taking a step as a program and winning more than they've won in the postseason since 1993, right? And we all know that they haven't won a New Year's Six game since 1993. So they got that monkey hanging over their, on their back. But again, there are no more New Year's Six games, and so,
there are, but they're playoff.
But they're part of the postseason, right? And so that not only. So the New Year's Six games are still important, right? And it's still a step.
Mean a whole lot more now.
That's my exact point. So the pressure has ratcheted up in those bowl games than they would have in the past. Like I will feel a heck of a lot different going to the Fiesta Bowl next year than I did when they were playing in the Fiesta Bowl a couple of years ago.
Correct.
You know what I mean? From a pressure standpoint, from a, this is a big game standpoint. Like New Year's Six games almost felt like an afterthought,
which is sad.
It's hugely
excitement of media and college football leadership at large, but it's also the reality.
Right.
I can think it's bull crap, and I can think it's unnecessary and completely avoidable, but still say, but it's also the truth.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I don't like it, but that is because we're talking perception here.
100%. Yes.
And that's absolutely correct, Vince. So the question is then, what is your prediction for the postseason when it comes to the what the results are? And I'm going to do this, Vince, and people are going to get mad, I think, but I'm going to love it. Okay. I'm going to leave a little bit of a teaser for the postseason success in today's prediction show, because I want to save it for tomorrow's overall college football show. But I will say this: part of my prediction is 11-1 minimum regular season.
Okay.
And I do believe they win at least 1 game in the playoff.
Okay.
Because 11-1, Notre Dame's a lock to make the playoff. And I think they're pretty much a lock to get a first round
to host
home game.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see any scenario where they're 11-1, they're a 9 seed or lower.
Completely agree with that statement. Yes.
So I'm going 11-1 and they get a win at home in the playoff.
Okay.
Beyond that, I want to save that for tomorrow's show, because we're going to predict the entire play. We're going to have our brackets and everything. It's going to be a lot of fun tomorrow. So, but I am predicting 11-1 plus 1 win.
So I will do the same thing just to keep people on their toes. And I'm not saying I'm predicting more than 1 win, but I am saying I will predict at least 1 win. Okay. I will predict 1 win, because I also agree with you. If they're 11-1, they're hosting. I like Notre Dame's chances hosting anybody. I don't care who it is. They're not a top 4. They're hosting somebody. So that means they're 9-12. I feel very good about Notre Dame's chances if they're hosting in the postseason. And so I will also predict a win, but I will save the rest of it for tomorrow. But 11-1 absolutely gets them a hosting gig. There's no doubt about it.
And they will win that first round.
And they will win that first round. Absolutely.
I don't care who it is. They will win that first round.
I don't care either.
So let me ask you this, Vince. What is the thing that you are most confident about when you look at this football team that leads you to believe confidently? Like my prediction of a minimum 11-1 plus 1, I'm actually pretty confident in that prediction. If they're worse than that, honestly, it will be a disappointment. That's why I said, like we talked earlier, 10-2 in a postseason win, that's progress. I'm still going to be disappointed.
Absolutely.
Especially if it's not a non-playoff win. Because
Correct.
I think 10-2 might still get them in if one of their 2 losses is to some team that you don't expect them to lose to, because then they're still going to have a lot of really good wins. But 10-2 does make it a little bit questionable.
Well,
for example, if they're 10-2 and Georgia's 9-3, and they're the final 2 teams in consideration for the last at-large, Georgia at 9-3 will have more losses, but they will also have likely more really good wins because of their schedule. There's a chance that could be true.
See,
Georgia at 10-2, no brainer they have more quality wins. Well, like based on what we think of teams. So 10-2 could certainly still get them in, but it's just going to be harder. And it's not a given that they're going to be at home.
Correct.
At 10-2.
Oh, now, I don't think they are.
Because I do think there's going to be a lot of chaos this year in college football.
Sure.
Because of the schedules and things like that. But it's just going to be a lot harder.
Here's my blanket statement on 10-2. At 11-1, you're in. It's no problem. You're hosting. At 10-2, you need help, and it really depends on what the rest of college football looks like. 10-2 is not a lock to make the playoff. It's just not. You're going to get a lot of Notre Dame detractors because, again, the thought process is that the schedule is easy, and that will hurt them, right? But I also,
although by the end of the year, we'll know whether that was or wasn't.
Agreed. Completely agree with that. I think that there may be a case where 10-2 is a lock for getting in the playoff, depending on what happens around them.
There's a bunch of 3-loss SEC and Big Ten teams. It's more likely in the SEC than it is the Big Ten.
Sure.
The SEC gave a lot of its top teams challenging schedules.
Right.
And a lot of the SEC teams are playing really good out-of-conference games. I mean, Texas is going to Michigan.
Sure.
Georgia's going to Clemson. I mean, LSU's playing USC. Where you're just not seeing as much of that in the Big Ten.
So that's why I think 10-2, there's a discussion. Like, you've got to give me way more data points for me to know if Notre Dame's getting in the playoff.
Who they beat, who they lose to.
Absolutely.
How good are those teams? Oh, exactly.
11-1, they're in. And I also think they're a lock to host at 100%. That point. I really do.
Now, are they a lock to be the 5 seed? That's a different conversation.
Sure. 5 through 8 is up in the air. But 10-2, I think you've given up some of your, control. Yeah, I'll say that. I think you give up some of your control at that point.
You're going to need somebody to maybe lose in the conference title game to get a 3rd or 4th loss.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't like that position for Notre Dame. They need help at that point. So, So what am I most confident in? What am I most confident in? To be perfectly honest with you, Brian, I could go either direction with this, and it's kind of a bigger statement, I guess. I hate to say this because it's discounting the other side of the football, but I'm most confident in Notre Dame's offense right now. Mm-hmm. I really am.
Interesting.
When you add in what I think about Riley Leonard, when you add in what I think about this backfield, when you add in what I think about this wide receiver room and how deep it is, when you add in what I think about the tight ends, yes, there's question marks up front right now. But I think those question marks will get answered by the time the end of the season rolls around. I think there's still talent on the offensive line, and I don't think it's going to hold them back. Okay. And then the cherry on top, and probably the most important piece, is the fact that Mike Denbrock is the offensive coordinator. Yeah. I feel very, very confident in this offense. I could make the same argument for the defense because of Al Golden and because of the experience and because of the depth at defensive line, all of those things. I just love the possibilities of this offense, where they are, what they can do, what I think they're going to do, the fact that they can absorb some injuries if necessary at some of the positions. I think that helps them as well. I am very confident what this offense is going to be able to do. And you and I have talked about this ad nauseum for years. You can have a defense that can get you to the playoffs. Notre Dame has had that in the past. I think they've got that again. I really do. This is an elite defense, okay? But you need an offense that can score points if you want to win a championship and if you want to win playoff games. Notre Dame has not had that in the past. They have that now, in my opinion. That's why I'm confident in what this offense means to this team and their potential success in December and January.
I got to go with the defense is the thing I'm most confident in, just because it's been so good really in recent seasons. It's been the thing that's fueled this team in 2012. It fueled the team in 2017. until their late collapse. It fueled this team in 2020. It fueled this team last year. I've got to go with the defense. I think that's the thing I can say right now. I'm most confident in my prediction. Now, I'll tell you this right now, Vince. If you're correct and the offense plays championship football, if I had more confidence that I knew the offense was going to be good. Now, I think it's going to be very good, but that's why I'm 11-1, because I think the offense is going to be very good. If you were to say, hey, Brian, I fast forwarded to the end of the season. I found a time machine, right? The TMV left one of their things, I can travel through time or whatever. It was a TVA. Then here's what I told you. Riley Leonard's healthy all year. The O-line ends up being pretty good. And this offense is consistently one of the best in the country. If you told me, and that's the only thing you told me, I'd say, well, then they're going to go 12-0. They're not going to lose anybody. If their offense is that, they're not losing anybody. Because their defense is literally giving them a chance to win every single game of the Marcus Freeman tenure outside of one. And that would be USC 2 years ago. That's it. And even then it was like, okay, but you still had chances in that game to go out there and tie it up or take a lead and gain some momentum, and you fumbled it away or threw a pick or whatever. If you told me that, I'd say they're not losing the game.
Sure.
They're not going to lose a game. I'm still I need to see it. I think they're going to be better on offense, but I still need to see it. And I especially need to see it in the big games. I need to see if the offense shows up against A&M. Sure. I need to see if the offense shows up against Louisville this year, who's still going to be very good on defense. I need to see if they're going to show up against Florida State. And I need to see if they're going to show up at USC. I know the offense can do what they need to do when they play USC at home, and the defense spots them 21 points. Hey, play with no pressure. How are they going to go out there next year when the defense can't set you up for 3 touchdowns in that game, right? Because we saw what happened against Clemson last year. Last year's Clemson team wasn't even as good as the year before's Clemson team, but the defensive special teams didn't spot them 3 touchdowns. And look what happened. They got beat. And so they weren't good enough on offense to overcome the occasional game where the defense wasn't elite. And so I'm so confident in that group. If you are correct about the offense, and then this team will not lose a game in the regular season. Because as I said, their schedule is more challenging than a lot of Notre Dame fans give it credit for.
Sure.
But it's not the gauntlet of 88, 89, 97, 2017, that type of thing. It's not that. We need to be able to have a real conversation about the schedule. And I think a lot of Notre Dame fans are off base about saying it's not good, it's this, it's that. I don't agree with that. But if you're to sit there and be like, oh no, and talk yourself into, Miami, Ohio winning 11 games last year is the same as winning 11 games in the Big Ten. Okay, you lost me.
Right.
It's still the MAC. Now they're a very good MAC team, but it's still a MAC team. You know what I mean? No, I'm not going there either. The truth to me is in the middle of the perception about the schedule. It's the homer take that they convince themselves that everyone's good, and then there's the opposite, sort of the pessimist take, or the people who think they're realistic but they're a little overly negative, I think. And then there's some that kind of are being honest. They're just evaluations are a little bit off in one way or the other. So there's all types of reasons to go. I think the truth is kind of in the middle. It's a challenging schedule. It's not a brutal, how do you manage this season?
Sure.
My 11-1 comes down to, because I still don't know that this offense can answer the bell for 12 games. That's really where my 11-1 comes from.
I get it.
If I knew that the offense is going to some degree answer the bell every week, this team won't lose a game. Because let's be honest, Mike Denbrock's offense answered the bell every week last year.
Yep.
They played well enough to win every week last year.
Defense
Even Florida State. The offense played well enough to win that game early. Your defense just kept giving up scores. And, if I knew that to be true, man, there's nobody beats them in the regular season. Nobody beats them in the regular. And our conversation tomorrow would be really fun. That's still, and that leads into the kind of the final piece of this is, what's the biggest stumbling block? It's that right there. It's the offense, and primarily the offensive line. Can the offensive line be good enough against Texas A&M and Louisville and Florida State and USC for this team to have the balance it needs to beat the best teams in the schedule? That's where I'm at. And so that's the stumbling block for me. But if I'm wrong, or not if I'm wrong, because I'm not predicting it's going to be bad.
Right, but it's the biggest question mark
if
right
they
now.
answer that question
right.
effectively, then this team
Exactly.
doesn't lose a game.
Yeah.
But that's still the thing that's going to be the stumbling block. Where I could see the defense playing great against A&M and you lose 17-14, 17-13, something like that. And one of those scores is set up by a turnover on offense. That's still my big fear. Same thing in Florida State. That's still my big fear because, you know, that's the side that's got to show me that it can be that.
Gotcha.
What's the biggest concern? The thing that could keep them from being as good as you think that we're predicting that they're going to be?
Offensive line is absolutely one, but a different one I wanted to kind of bring up, and it's a stumbling block because we don't know. And maybe this is going to sound terrible, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but it's still something that we don't know. If Notre Dame is going to make a run in the playoff, Marcus Freeman is going to be in a position that he's never been in before as a head coach. And how is he going to handle that? What is that going to look like from a head coaching perspective? I don't know the answer to that. I think he'll probably be fine, but to me, that's a bit of a stumbling block for me right now. It's from the head coaching position. I have faith that it will be fine, but it's still a stumbling block. Marcus Freeman has never coached in the playoffs. He has never coached in those kind of big games before. This will be a new avenue for him.
If you want to be unfair, but also true, the biggest game he coached in the postseason was the Fiesta Bowl, and they blew a 28-7.
And it didn't end well.
Now, I think that's very unfair to say.
I think he was doing some other things, and I don't think the outcome was
right. But that's the only game like that we've seen.
That's fair.
Right?
That's fair.
If someone brought that up to me, I'd push back on it hard. But I'm just saying, to your point, I'm backing up your point that we haven't seen him in that moment since he got to Notre Dame.
I think, like I said, I have faith that he'll be fine, but it is still a question because he's never had to do it before. He's never had to guide this team through a playoff run. He has never been in the playoffs, period, right? And so we have seen him get this team up for big games and things like that, but this is going to be big game after big game after big game after big game. And so can he
different animal?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Can he keep them where they need to be to make a playoff run?
To your point, you know, LSU in Alabama in 2011, that's a team that to me was able to kind of Nick Saban doesn't win 7 titles in a 12-team playoff. Now he still wins maybe 4.
Sure.
Like his 11
so
team
much
doesn't
harder
win a title to me.
Because
that team gets beat by Stanford or Oklahoma State, in my opinion, that year. But they went 11-1, did not play in the SEC title game because they lost to LSU, and they got a rematch against LSU in a neutral field. LSU beat you at home, where now that team might get exposed in the postseason because you now got to win 4 games because that Bama team would have had to win 4 games to win a title, and I don't think they would have. That was not a great Bama team.
Right.
Now, you could argue that maybe there was another Bama team in other years that maybe in a 12-team could have won. I don't know that I would take that case, to be honest with you.
Sure.
And so I look at it. It is a lot more challenging than now in the 14 playoff era.
Absolutely. And now look, in his defense, nobody has taken a team through this entire playoff run. You know, the most you've ever had to do is 2 or 3 if you count like the conference championship game, which you could make a case that's fair. Part of the playoff.
It is.
Okay.
Because if Ohio State doesn't beat, was it Michigan State in 2014, they beat Wisconsin in 2014. If they don't beat Wisconsin in 2014, they're not even in the playoff.
Right.
So like in the 14 playoff, because I mean, it was win or go home.
Correct.
For them. And so, you know, it's not always the case. Georgia lost their title game in 2021 and then still won the national title. So there's always exceptions to the rule. But by and large, you lose your title game, you didn't
probably
get to play for championship.
Right. Now you do get that opportunity. Right. And so
the problem with Saban is Saban won 2 titles in years where his team didn't even play for the SEC title.
Yeah, this is true.
And still got into the playoff. Like that's you know, that's the difference. Right. But only had to play 2 games, and one of them was against both years they beat another SEC team in the title game.
Right.
I still would have liked to have seen that 2011 Alabama team against 2011 Stanford with Andrew Luck. And I would have loved to have seen that 2011 Bama team try to defend that Brandon Weeden Oklahoma State team that beat Stanford in the Fiesta Bowl. Because remember, the only game Oklahoma State lost that year was this. They played a Thursday night game after there was that big plane crash that killed a bunch of members of the athletic department. Do you remember that? And they still made them play that game. That's the only game at Iowa State. It's the only game Oklahoma State lost all year. And so, but you can't hide, you can't avoid those type of games now that you're in a 12 team
right.
playoff. That is one of the advantages of a 12-team playoff. Is that, and by the way, the leading into that game, they beat Texas Tech 66-6. The week after that devastating loss, their next game was against Oklahoma. They beat them 44-10. That was number 10 Oklahoma. They beat them 44-10. They beat number 22 Texas 38-26 on the road. They beat number 8 A&M 30-29 on the road that year in 2011. So that team was very good. Very good. Bama never had to play them. They didn't have to play Andrew Luck and Stanford. So that was always kind of that thing, Vince, that you look at and say, man, that's a tough one. But like 2012, what if that Georgia team that lost to Bama at the very end of that game, they get into the postseason, they're still alive. So there is the opportunity for it. But in a 4-team playoff, unless your name was Bama, you lose in your conference title game, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio State wouldn't have got the same benefit of the doubt that Alabama got.
Right.
Or Georgia got in 2021. So, yeah, it's a very, I didn't even think about that, Vince. Like, I'm sitting there thinking of all these potential stumbling blocks. I'm thinking about parts of the team. I never even thought about the head coach. That's a really good point because he's got to prove it now. As Karen said in the chat too, like there's a first time for everything. And that's
absolutely
100% true.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, and when Nick Saban won his title in 2004 at LSU, he had never had a team that was a title contender prior to that.
Right.
I mean, his best team, you could argue prior to that, was 2 years before when he was at LSU. That team finished the season in the top 10. They finished the season ranked 7th. That's a team that lost 3 games in the regular season. They lost to Tennessee by 8. They lost at home to Florida by 29, and lost at home to Ole Miss by 11. And so like,
I get it.
That was the best team he ever had. And the year before his first title, remember they got their brains beat in by Utah in the Sugar Bowl. By Brian Johnson was their quarterback. Remember that? It was Kyle Whittingham's tenure at Utah, and Andy Ludwig was their offensive coordinator on that team. I mean, they smacked Bama that year. Next year, Bama goes out and runs the table. So until you do it, of course,
exactly, and that's
you don't know it. And that's the thing. We're not saying he doesn't have the ability, but I think he would tell you, Coach Freeman would tell you, yeah, I got to prove it. I think we're doing some good things, but now we got to go out and show that what we're trying to do is correct.
It's an unknown. It's an unknown, and that's why it's a good
we did have a super chat, Vince, that I wanted to get to. In this speaks to what we were just talking about. This is a super chat from PK What-to-Do. Would love to hear, on top of your general predictions, some predictions with certain conditions. For example, record prediction if I tell you that the O-line is the Joe Moore winner finalist. Now, I don't know what other ones you'd like to hear about. I'm going to go with the one that you gave us because I think it's very relevant to the conversation we just had.
Agreed.
So to his point, if you were to tell me, again, you get that time machine, or it's not a time machine, you can just, the TV, what allows you to dump to different universes or whatever. But let's say you use the time machine that they built in Avengers, right? Avengers Endgame. Okay, so I can go back in time, and I can go forward in time as well. And you're to tell me, hey, Brian, I went ahead and I fast forwarded to the end of the year, and I was only there for 10 seconds. The only thing I learned while I was there is that Notre Dame won the Joe Moore Award this year.
12-0.
12-0, and they're at least in the semifinals at the very least.
Yep.
But if this team has a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, I think this team can play with and beat anyone.
Correct. Yep.
Like there's not like if you could tell me I can take the 15-0 line, the 17-0 line, or the 20-0 line and put them on this team, I don't think anyone beats Notre Dame.
Yep.
In the regular season. And I think the number of teams that might be able to beat them in the postseason, you can count on one hand, because they'd have an elite defense, an elite quarterback, very talented skill players everywhere. And what's the thing that you're concerned about right now? O-line. If you were to tell me that this O-line wins a Joe Moore Award at the end of the year, it's because Notre Dame's undefeated. And honestly, didn't play in a whole lot of close games, to be honest with you. Like if Notre Dame's O-line plays like Joe Moore Award winners against Texas A&M, that game won't be close.
Right.
The only thing A&M really has over Notre Dame is that they can neutralize that offense with their defensive line. You take that away, and all of a sudden, there's not a lot of good matchups that favor Texas A&M. same thing against Florida State. If the O-line plays like Joe Moore winners against Louisville, that game's not close, Vince.
Right.
If they play like Joe Moore Award winners against Florida State, that game will be closer, but it won't be overly competitive, in my opinion. That's a big jump. I don't see that happening. But if I knew that to be true, I don't think anybody beats this football team.
Agreed.
And somebody else said, Andrew Gilmore said this, if Riley Leonard is a Heisman candidate, we are legit title contenders. Agree, because I don't think Riley Leonard can be a legit Heisman contender if the O-line doesn't play well.
Correct.
It all circles back to that for me.
Yep.
And so I think all those things are absolutely true. But if Notre Dame's team wins the Joe Moore Award or is a Joe Moore Award finalist, I don't know that anybody beats this football team.
Agreed.
I just don't think it's going to happen unless something else just goes like, what the heck? Like, I don't know like how that happened. So yeah, I that's where I would go. That's a really good point. We had a couple other super chats, Vince. I wanted to get to Anthony Solomon. Thanks for the show today, Anthony. Thank you for the super chat. I very, very much avoided it. Kay Grant says I'll have to watch this later, but wanted to drop in. Go Irish! Can't wait to watch this. I hope you enjoy it, Kay Grant. I did want to say this. This is really sums up our rankings. There was a comment from Christopher LaFaro. Confident about the season, yet nervous about A&M. Make it make sense, boys. And I'll tell you this is where we just were talking about, Christopher. It's there's still those unknowns.
Sure.
We love the talent of this team. I don't know anyone that doesn't think this team has a lot of talent. But there's just a lot of unknowns, whether it's not, what Marcus Freeman really go on the road and win a top 20 game? Okay, well, we got to see that against a team that's going to have better talent than Duke had, let's be honest. Top to bottom, A&M's going to have more talent top to bottom to Duke. If not, Mike Elko's probably still at Duke. You know what I mean? If we're being honest, it's the unknowns. And it's the opener. If this game was played in week 5 and we're now 3 weeks away from the A&M game, we've seen them play a couple games and we're probably feeling a certain way and you're, whatever. So that's what it comes down to, Christopher. It's easy. It's still the unknowns. This is that time of the year where you get really excited, but there's still those things in the back of your mind and deep in your soul that you're just like, yeah, I can't wait to see this team, but I'm really nervous about this.
Or absolutely. And for good reason, right? I mean, we haven't seen this group of Notre Dame football players play together. I mean, there's reason to be nervous. You can have the best game plan possible. You can have everything. And look, we're not at every practice, so we don't get to see a lot of these guys interacting with each other from a football standpoint. We get to see them go through some drills and some different things, and we can extrapolate from that, and we can hope, and we can use our knowledge as coaches, and we can do all of those things. But at the end of the day, we're all nervous about it because it's a big game on the road to open things up. It's the first time these guys have all played together. It's the first time that all of these coaches have coached together. It's a lot of firsts, right? And there's reasons to be nervous. Now, I'm also confident, and so that kind of displaces some of the nervousness. But if you just go in thinking you're just going to whoop just open up a can on these guys and it's not going to be any kind of drama, then I
it's a homer take that could be proven true.
It could,
right? Like it definitely could happen, but it's a homer take now,
right?
You know what I mean?
Not one I'm willing to make at the moment,
right?
But, yeah,
exactly, and that's kind of where I'm at. That's where I'm at. So I mean, we'll see. We'll see kind of where they're at there. We also had a super sticker from Nathan Indy Milton fan. Appreciate that very much, man. Appreciate you very much. But that's what it comes down to, Vince. This is probably the most confident I've been in a team going into a season.
It's fair,
but I still deep down just have that. I just got to see it.
Absolutely.
It's not even BK PTSD. It's post Lou PTSD, right? Because we've been there for 30 years. There's been teams that we thought, man, this 09 offense. You got Jimmy Clausen and Armando Allen and Robert Hughes and Michael Floyd and Golden Tate and Kyle Rudolph and Zach Martin and the team just went out there and just laid an egg in big moments. This is probably, I'll say this, the biggest level of optimism I have now is this is the first year that I've gone into a season where I really felt could predict that both sides of the ball are going to be really good, to your point earlier. Whereas in 15, it was like, man, I love this offense, but I'm nervous about the defense. Sure. In 17, it's like, same thing. I love this O-line, but how's Wimbush going to be? Is the defense going to get much better? 2018, you felt really good about certain parts of it, but are they going to be okay here? Are they going to be okay there? There were question marks in the secondary going into 2018. Fortunately, some of those questions got answered. Alohi Gilman stepped up and played great. but who's going to step up at receiver in 2018? You weren't very good throwing the ball in 17, and you lost your best receiver now in Equanimity St. Brown. Miles Boykin steps up. Like going into 2018, like we look back now and think about how good Miles and Chase were, but who really thought Miles Boykin was going to be that? He had like 18 career catches going into 2018. And so then there's other years where it's just like you thought that one side was going to be good, the other side you're not sure about. I am most confident in both sides of the ball this season. It's just when you talk about competing for a title, I still need to see the offense do it. I think they're capable of it. It's the most confident I've been in a long time. I just need to see it.
Yep.
And that's going to be the big question mark. So that's where we're at.
All right, Brian, that's going to do it for our Notre Dame specific prediction show.
Remember when I said that it wasn't going to be as long of a show?
Yeah, I know, and I didn't.
You just laughed at me. I was like, dang it, you're right.
I didn't believe you. Said famous last words.
Yeah.
But anyway, thanks for joining us for our Notre Dame prediction show. Make sure you hop on with us tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be the bigger picture prediction show. We're going to predict the entire college football playoff bracket. We are going to predict the conference champions, which may be different than what our conference outlooks were because we've been doing them for like a month. And so maybe things have changed. I don't know.
A little bit for me.
Find out.
A little bit for me has. Yeah.
Okay. So there you go. So you're going to have to tune in tomorrow. You're going to have to hit that notification bell so it'll remind you to tune in for tomorrow. And we're going to have some fun with it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we may even throw a mailbag in at the end. We'll see how we're feeling by the time that show gets over. If it's a short show, then of course we'll throw in the mailbag. But, we never know.
It will be shorter. So I'm confident we'll have a mailbag. Because I asked Vince, I said, what would you like to do as part of your last show? And he's like, you know me, I always love a good mailbag. So I was like, okay.
We're going to do a mailbag. So we're going to have some fun with that tomorrow. So make sure you tune in. Of course, in the meantime, make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends. And of course, jump on the boards, boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you are a premium member, then you get all the info and you get it quick. And that's where you want to be. So make sure you hit it, boards.irishbreakdown.com. In the meantime, that's Brian. I'm Vince. Thanks for hanging out with us. And we'll talk to you next time. That would be tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown podcast.